Welcome to a calm Viking trade journey down the river roads to Miklagard, where the water is patient, the cargo list is sacred, and every dock seems to charge a fee for noticing you. Follow Eric, Mara, Leif and Bran as they portage boats over muddy paths, bargain in crowded markets, and face the gentlest pressure of Byzantine customs and coin checking. Settle in for soft tension, light sarcasm, and sleepy drama, where the most dangerous thing is a receipt that tries to lie. Chapter 1. The cargo list that wanted a quiet life. The morning water lay flat and patient, like it had agreed to behave for once. The sky was pale, the air was cool, and the shore smelled of wet wood and old smoke from last night's fires. If the world had a habit of making speeches, this would have been the part where it promised a smooth journey. The world did not make speeches. It preferred invoices. Eric Ashford stood at the edge of the dock with a wax tablet in his hands and a stylus that had been sharpened to a point fine enough to write regrets. He did not look like a man about to chase fortune across half the known world. He looked like a man about to argue with a market scale. He ran his thumb along the edge of the tablet and read the list again, as if the words might have moved during the night. Furs, neatly bundled and tied. Wax, sealed in small blocks. Honey in jars wrapped in cloth. Iron tools in a chest. Amber pieces in a sack. A small roll of fine cloth saved for people who respected fine cloth. And then, of course, the coins. Not too many, because too many would attract interest from the sort of people who considered interest a hobby. Enough to get through the first markets, enough to pay the first fees, enough to learn once again that the first fees were never the last fees. Leif Rowan sat on a coiled rope with his back against a post. He watched Eric with the steady calm of a man who had already accepted that writing was a form of weather. He had a small book of his own, bound in leather that smelled like a goat with ambitions. He was writing something with a piece of charcoal. Bran Oakley was kneeling beside the boat, checking the seams where the planks met, pressing his thumb into the pitch and nodding as if the boat had said something sensible. He spoke to it quietly, which was either comforting or suspicious, depending on how you felt about boats. Mara Lark arrived carrying a basket that held bread, dried fish, and a bundle of herbs that would make the fish seem less certain about itself. She set the basket down and brushed her hands, then looked at Eric and the tablet. "If you read that list any harder," she said, "you will wear a hole through it." Eric looked up, mild and tired in the same expression. "The list wants a quiet life," he said. "I am trying to give it one." Leif did not look up from his book. "The list chose the wrong trade route," he said. Bran patted the side of the boat. "The boat did too," he said. "But here we are." They were here and they were leaving. The boat was not large, but it was built for river work, broad enough to carry cargo, shallow enough to slide over sandbars without sulking, strong enough to survive the long scrape of portage rollers. Bran had built it to be practical, which was a brave choice in a world that rewarded drama. Eric walked the length of the dock and checked the lines. He checked them twice, because it was better to look fussy now than swim later. He stepped into the boat and settled the cargo with the care of a man arranging guests who might sue him if offended. Mara climbed in and sat near the basket. She looked at the sky, then the water, then the shore. She did not look back at whatever had been left behind. That was not her style. She preferred forward, even when forward led to toll posts. Leif stepped in last, still writing, as if the act of boarding could be recorded and later argued with. Bran pushed them off with a pole. The boat slid away from the dock with a soft shiver, like it had been waiting all night and did not want to show it. The oars dipped. The water took them. Behind them, the shore became a thin line of dark trees. Ahead, the river widened and split into gentle channels, each one offering its own opinion on where they should go. They chose the one that looked least dramatic. The river accepted this choice with the reluctant kindness of something that had many other choices. Eric sat near the middle and held the wax tablet against his knee. He did not write yet. He watched the water. He listened for the sound of trouble. Trouble had many voices, but one of its favourites was silence followed by a sudden splash. Leif cleared his throat in a way that suggested he was about to present findings to a board council. "First note," he said, "we have departed." Mara turned her head slowly. "Thank you," she said. "I was unsure." Leif kept writing. "Second note. The bread smells hopeful." Bran smiled. "Third note," he said. "The boat is perfect." Eric finally wrote. The sound of stylus on wax was small and steady. It was the sort of sound that made you believe in order, if only for a moment. They travelled through a day that did not demand heroics. The river carried them past reed beds and low banks. Birds lifted from the water and settled again. Once they saw a fisherman in a small boat who nodded without curiosity, as if trade crews passing through were as common as clouds. By late afternoon they reached the first small market landing, a cluster of docks and sheds where the river narrowed and slowed. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Dogs watched from the shade. People moved with the practiced speed of those who had learned that daylight was a currency. Eric tied up and stepped onto the dock. He took the wax tablet with him. He did not take a weapon. That was a personal choice. He preferred tools. Tools did not get emotional. A man in a rough tunic approached with the careful confidence of someone who owned a stamp, even if the stamp was only imaginary. "Fee for landing," the man said. Eric nodded. "Of course." Mara leaned toward Leif and spoke softly. "Watch this," she said. "He is about to smile so politely the fee will increase." Leif made a small mark in his book. "Predicted fee increase," he murmured. Eric asked, "How much?" The man looked at the boat, then at the cargo, then at Eric, as if deciding what kind of day he wanted. "2 small coins," he said. Eric reached into his pouch, produced 2 coins, and held them out. The man took them and bit one because some people believed their teeth could solve economics. He frowned, then nodded, then tucked the coins away. He did not thank Eric. He did not smile. He walked away as if he had done a great public service. Leif watched him go and said, "That was almost reasonable. I feel uneasy." Mara stepped onto the dock and lifted the basket. They came here to trade, but also to gather what you gathered in places like this. News, names, warnings, the kind of information that did not sit politely on a cargo list. They walked through the market slowly. Eric spoke to a trader selling coarse rope, asked about the price, then did not buy. Bran touched a set of wooden rollers stacked near a shed, tested their weight, then nodded as if greeting old friends. Mara moved through the crowd and listened without appearing to listen. Leif wrote down every coin, every measure, every whispered complaint about toll posts upstream. They sold a small bundle of furs to a woman who knew the value of winter. They bought dried fruit that looked like it had travelled farther than any of them. They traded 1 iron tool for a jar of good salt, because salt was a promise you could eat. As the sun lowered, they found an inn. It was not grand. It was a long hall with benches, a low roof and a hearth that smelled like every meal it had ever seen. The keeper was a round man with a tired face and a sharp eye for payment. "Beds are extra," the keeper said. Eric nodded. "Of course." Mara whispered to Leif, "He says that like it is wisdom." Leif whispered back, "It is wisdom. Expensive wisdom." They paid for space on the floor. They ate soup that was mostly water and hope. They drank a warm brew that tasted like herbs arguing with each other. Around them other travellers talked. Some were heading north with cloth and glass, their faces thin from wind. Others were heading south with wax and honey, their eyes bright with the idea of distant markets. A few had the guarded look of men who had paid too many fees and were starting to consider religion. Eric sat with his back against a post and took out the wax tablet. He began to rewrite the cargo list, not because it had changed much, but because rewriting made the world feel less loose. Leif watched him. "You realize," he said, "that the list will not protect you from toll posts." Eric did not look up. "It protects me from forgetting what I have," he said. "Toll posts can take what they want, but I refuse to misplace my own misery." Bran laughed quietly. Mara smiled, then leaned back and let her eyes rest half shut. The inn creaked in the wind, the floor complained under shifting bodies. Someone coughed. Someone snored like a small sawmill. Outside, the river flowed on, dark and patient, carrying other boats and other lists toward other versions of the same trouble. Eric finished the list and held the tablet up for a moment, reading it again. The words sat there, obedient and calm, for now. He set the tablet down and rested his hands on his knees. Tomorrow, he thought, would be longer. Tomorrow would include new faces and new fees. Tomorrow might include the first portage and the slow indignity of dragging a boat over land as if the river had decided to test their commitment. Mara opened one eye. "You are thinking loudly," she said. Eric blinked. "I am not speaking," he said. "You are holding your worries like a lantern," she said. "Put it out. Save the oil." Leif added, "If you must worry, do it in writing. At least then it can be itemized." Bran patted the floor beside him. "Sleep," he said. "The boat will still be a boat in the morning." Eric let out a slow breath and leaned back. The inn smelled of smoke and damp wool. The night pressed close, but it was a soft pressure, like a blanket that did not quite fit. He closed his eyes and imagined the road to Miklagard as a line drawn on water. He imagined markets along great rivers, where coins rang and goods changed hands and officials smiled like knives wrapped in velvet. He imagined customs houses and coin checkers and toll posts that appeared out of mist, demanding payment for the privilege of continuing to exist. Then he imagined the cargo list again, quiet and neat, wanting nothing but peace. "Tomorrow," he promised it silently, "we will keep you as peaceful as we can." The river did not respond. It never did. It only carried you forward. Chapter 2. Ladoga Water and the Art of Looking Unbothered. They left before sunrise, when the inn was still arguing with itself in creaks and sleepy murmurs. The keeper accepted their payment with the brisk cheer of a man who believed in routine. Outside, the air was cold enough to make their breaths look like small ghosts escaping. The river widened into the great water of Ladoga, and the boat rode a gentle swell that made the cargo shift and settle with a soft thump. Bran adjusted a strap and spoke to the boat under his breath, as if reassuring a nervous horse. Eric sat forward and watched the far shore. It was distant and low, a dark band of trees that made the lake feel larger than it had any right to be. The water was calm, but calm water was not always kind. Calm water was simply quiet about its decisions, Leif wrote in his book. "Note," he said, "the lake is pretending to be friendly." Mara rubbed her hands together and looked at the pale horizon. "I would like to enjoy this," she said, "but I can feel a fee approaching." Eric did not look away from the water. "Fees approach by land," he said. Mara tilted her head. "Then why do they always arrive on docks?" Leif made another mark. "Philosophical question about fees," he said. They made steady progress along the shore, keeping close enough to land that they could find shelter if the wind changed its mind. The boat moved with the quiet confidence of good craft. Bran had made sure of that. He had also made sure the oars were balanced, the ropes were sound, and the rollers for portage were stacked and lashed like precious cargo. By mid-morning they reached a trading post, larger than the first one, with more docks and more people, and a smell that combined fish, smoke, and ambition. A cluster of sheds held goods under rough awnings. Men hauled sacks. Women argued over cloth. A boy ran by carrying a bundle of something that might have been herbs, or might have been trouble. Eric brought the boat in slow and careful. He tied up, checked the knot, then checked it again. He stepped onto the dock and waited for the inevitable. It arrived in the form of a clerk with a wooden board and a piece of chalk. The clerk was young, clean, and confident in the way of people who had not yet been corrected by life. "Landing fee," the clerk said, looking at the boat as if it were a number. Eric nodded. "Of course." Leif whispered to Mara, "I miss the man who bit coins. At least he had a hobby." Mara whispered back, "Give this one time, he will develop habits." The clerk looked at Eric. "Cargo?" Eric held up the wax tablet. "Goods for trade," he said. "Furs, wax, honey, iron." The clerk nodded as if he had invented those items. Fee depends on cargo weight. Bran stepped onto the dock and smiled with the patience of someone who had carried too much wood for too many years. "How will you measure weight?" he asked without lifting it. The clerk blinked. "We estimate," he said. Mara tilted her head. "I also estimate," she said. "I estimate you will choose the estimate that improves your day." The clerk looked offended, which was impressive given he was about to charge them. He cleared his throat. "2 coins," he said. Eric reached for his pouch. Leif coughed softly. Eric paused. "Yes, Leif." Leif held up his book. "But it was 1 coin at the last market," he said. "The water did not get heavier since then." The clerk stared at him. "That was another market," he said. Leif nodded. "True," he said. "This market must have more expensive air." Bran made a quiet sound that might have been a laugh. Eric handed over 2 coins without comment. Mara watched the clerk tuck them away and then step aside, as if he had done them a favour. They moved into the market. Eric traded small amounts, careful not to empty any sack too early. Bran looked for spare wood and rope. Mara found a woman selling bread that looked far better than it had any right to be. Leif asked questions that sounded casual but were not. They learned the names of rivermen who ran goods south. They learned where the next toll posts were likely to be. They learned that portage points could be friendly or unfriendly depending on who had arrived first, and decided they owned the place. They also learned that salt was more expensive here, and that anyone selling it smiled like they had personally invented hunger. Eric bought a small amount anyway. He did it with the grim tenderness of a man feeding a necessary habit. By afternoon the wind rose slightly, and the lake rippled like a sheet being shaken out. They decided to stop at another inn before crossing a wider stretch of open water. The inn sat near the docks, its walls dark with age and smoke. Inside, it was warmer than it looked, which was the highest compliment an inn could earn. They paid for floor space again. The keeper pointed to a corner as if granting them a small kingdom. Mara set down the basket and began arranging food. Leif sat and opened his book. Bran went outside to check the boat one more time, as if it might have wandered off in shame. Eric took out the wax tablet and began updating the cargo list. He wrote slowly, pausing to count jars, bundles, and sacks by touch. Leif watched him for a while, then said, "You know, some people travel for adventure." Eric did not look up. "I travel for profit," he said. "Adventure is what happens when profit is delayed." Mara handed him a piece of bread. "Eat," she said. "Your list will not chew for you." He ate. The bread was good, dense and slightly sour, the kind of bread that had survived decisions. He chewed slowly and listened to the room. A trader at the next table was talking about the river routes, about the long chain of water and land that led south. He mentioned portages, where boats were dragged over rollers and men sweated and swore and pretended it was noble. He mentioned markets farther down, where cloth from the south appeared like magic, and where silver changed hands so quickly it seemed alive. He also mentioned toll posts, and the way they multiplied, like weeds that learned to speak. Mara listened with half a smile. She leaned toward Eric. "You look like you want to argue with the concept of tolls," she said. "I want to argue with the implementation," Eric said. Leif tapped his book. "There is no implementation," he said. "There is only tradition, and the person holding out their hand." Bran returned and sat down, wiping his hands. "The boat is ready," he said. "It will not complain. It would like everyone else to behave." Mara raised an eyebrow. "The boat has expectations now." Bran nodded. "It has standards," he said. "It is built well. It deserves standards." They ate quietly. The inn was busy but not loud. People spoke in steady tones. Even the arguments were softened by tiredness. A dog lay by the hearth watching everything with the calm authority of an animal that had decided humans were strange but predictable. When the meal was done, Mara stood and looked around. She frowned slightly. "Where is the spoon?" she said. Leif looked up. "The spoon?" "Yes," she said. "The good spoon. The one that does not taste like old tin." Eric blinked. "This is what concerns you." Mara nodded. "It is a matter of principle," she said. "Also, it is my spoon." Bran looked amused. Did you label it? Mara gave him a look. With what? She said. A blessing. Leif wrote. Note, he said. Missing spoon incident begins. Mara moved through the room with quiet purpose. She did not accuse anyone. She simply watched hands, bowls, and pockets. She stopped near a man who was eating stew with suspicious enthusiasm. That is my spoon, she said gently. The man froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. He looked at Mara, then at the spoon, then at his bowl, as if hoping reality would change. This is a spoon, he said. Yes, Mara said, and it is mine. The man cleared his throat. I found it, he said. Mara nodded. How fortunate, she said. Now you have found me. The man hesitated, then handed it over. Mara took it, wiped it on a cloth, and returned to the corner. Leif looked impressed. That was calmer than most diplomacy, he said. Mara sat down and tucked the spoon away. A person must have something in this world that does not get taxed, she said. Eric smiled, small and tired. The spoon is exempt, he said. For now. They settled for sleep. The floor was hard, but they were used to hard. The air was warm, but it smelled of smoke and wool and too many people. Outside, the lake made soft sounds against the docks, like a quiet animal breathing. Eric lay back and stared at the ceiling. His mind ran ahead, as minds always did, down the long water road. He saw portage paths through forest, lined with rollers and footprints. He saw markets along the great rivers, with goods stacked high and voices low and sharp. He saw clerks with boards, men with stamps, women with scales, and all of them certain the world owed them a fee for being noticed. He also saw, for the first time clearly, the shape of the journey as a rhythm. Row, trade, pay. Row, trade, pay. Drag the boat, trade, pay. Repeat until you reach the great city where the rules were written in stone and the clerks wore better clothes. It would be tiring. It would be profitable if they did it right. It would be irritating even if they did it right. Mara spoke softly from beside him. Do not let your face show your thoughts tomorrow, she said. Eric turned his head slightly. Why? Because tollmen can smell worry, she said. They charge extra for it. Leif added from the darkness, looking unbothered is cheaper. Bran murmured, the boat recommends calm. Eric closed his eyes. Very well, he said. Tomorrow I will be calm. Tomorrow I will be unbothered. Tomorrow I will be an empty bowl. Mara made a quiet sound of approval. Good, she said. Empty bowls get filled. Worried bowls get measured. The inn creaked once, then settled. The lake kept breathing against the docks. Somewhere in the room, someone shifted and sighed. Eric let the rhythm of water and wood carry him towards sleep. The cargo list rested beside him, safe for the moment. The spoon was recovered. The coins were counted. The fees were paid. Tomorrow would bring new water, new faces, and new hands held out with polite certainty. But for now, in the hush between one market and the next, the world was quiet enough to pretend it could be reasonable. Chapter 3: Holmgard Ledgers and Market Gravity. The lake water narrowed back into river water, and the world began to feel like it had edges again. On Ladoga you could look out and imagine freedom. On a river you could look out and imagine a toll post building itself in the reeds. The boat moved along the current with the steady patience of a creature that understood work. The oars dipped. The hull murmured over shallow places. Bran watched the banks the way a carpenter watches a crooked beam, always expecting a problem to announce itself with an innocent face. Eric kept the wax tablet close, not for comfort, but for discipline. The cargo list stayed neat because neatness was cheaper than chaos. Chaos always charged a fee and never provided a receipt. Mara sat forward and scanned the river traffic. Small boats passed, low and busy. A larger trading craft drifted by with sacks stacked like a wall, and a crew that looked like it had forgotten the last time it slept without listening for footsteps. Leif wrote in his little book, the one that made him look like a priest of inconvenience. He recorded river landmarks, wind shifts, and every place where the water changed its tone. Some people read the world in waves. Leif read it in expenses. By late afternoon, the docks of Holmgard appeared, stretching along the shore like a long argument. The settlement rose behind them with timber buildings, smoke, and the busy sound of trade that never paused to breathe. It was not a grand city, but it had gravity. Boats came in and did not leave quickly. People arrived with plans and left with new plans they did not like as much. They guided the boat into a space that looked like it belonged to no one, and therefore belonged to everyone. Eric tied the line, checked the knot, then checked the post itself, because posts could be unreliable in a world full of creative accounting. A man approached with a wooden marker and a face that suggested he had been given authority and had not yet forgiven anyone for it. He looked at the boat, then at Eric, then at the cargo. Mark it Typhy. Eric handed over a coin without drama. The man took it with the calm satisfaction of someone who believed the river existed to support his lifestyle. He then held out the wooden marker, a small token with a notch cut into it. "Keep it visible," he insisted, as if visibility was a moral requirement. Mara turned the marker in her fingers. It looked like a piece of firewood that had decided to be important. She placed it where it could be seen and where it could not be stolen easily, because the world loved irony and theft loved opportunity. They stepped into Holmgard and were immediately pulled into the market flow. Stalls crowded close. Goods were stacked high and guarded by sharp eyes. The air smelled of smoke, fish, wax, and the faint metallic scent of coins that had been handled too long. Furs hung in bundles like sleeping animals. Wax blocks sat in neat piles, pale and promising. Honey jars glowed amber in the light, making every buyer briefly imagine a sweeter life. Iron tools gleamed dull and honest, the kind of honesty that could split wood and also fingers. Eric moved slowly, watching the scales. Some scales were balanced. Some scales were balanced only when the seller was watching you. He kept his voice even, kept his face calm, and kept his hand near his pouch without making it obvious. Obvious hands near pouches invited conversation from strangers with empty smiles. Mara drifted between stools with the quiet skill of someone who could hear meaning under words. She listened to the gossip that travelled faster than boats. A merchant complained about a toll post upriver that charged twice and laughed once. A traveller mentioned a portage point where rollers were scarce and tempers were common. Someone else spoke of Kiev like it was a promise and a threat in the same breath. Bran examined ropes and rollers with a reverence that made vendors offer discounts out of confusion. He bought extra cord, extra pitch, and a set of rollers that looked newer than their owner deserved. He paid without haggle, then haggled anyway, not for the money, but for the principle of it. The vendor gave in quickly, possibly to end the conversation before Bran adopted him. Leif found a clerk table near the market edge, a place where a young man sat under a rough awning, with papers and chalk, and an expression that suggested he loved rules the way other people loved music. Leif approached with the careful politeness of a man who wanted answers, not a lecture, and still received both. The young man explained market measures, he explained dock markers, he explained how receipts worked if you were honest, and how they worked if you were successful. He explained that travellers should keep their records, because records were proof, and proof sometimes made fees slightly smaller. Leif returned to the boat with a new list of local measures and a faintly haunted look. He handed Eric a small strip of wood with scratches on it. "Measure guide," he offered, as if gifting someone a new worry. Eric took it and nodded. Useful. Mara watched the strip of wood. "Everything becomes a list," she noted, "even the list of how to read lists." Leif flipped open his book and added a line. "A society is a pile of lists wearing different hats." The market work went well enough. They traded some furs for silver and some silver for supplies. They bought dried meat, better bread, and a small amount of cloth that would not tear the first time it met real work. Eric kept their trading steady, not flashy. Flashy trading attracted attention. Attention attracted fees. Fees attracted anger. Anger attracted mistakes. Mistakes attracted regret. And regret was hard to resell. As the sun lowered, they found a quiet corner of the docks, and located an inn that smelled less like damp wool, and more like someone had once washed something. The keeper had a face like a carved beam, straight lines and no extra warmth. He took payment, pointed to a section of floor, and moved on as if hospitality was a limited resource. Inside, the crew settled into the familiar ritual. Mara arranged food, Bran checked a strap on the cargo chest, Leif wrote down purchases and payments with the calm of a man who trusted paper more than water. Eric took out the wax tablet and began to update the cargo list. He wrote and erased and wrote again. He counted jars by touch. He checked knots. He measured how much space each bundle took, because space was also a form of currency. The list stayed tidy, but the world kept poking it with new details. Leif watched for a while, then leaned closer. One more thing. There is a stamp office near the market gate. Travellers can get a mark for river passage. Not required, but helpful when someone decides to invent a rule on the spot. Eric paused. Helpful how? Helpful like a shield made of paper. It will not stop a blow, but it makes the person swinging pause long enough to consider if the work is worth it. Bran made a soft sound of approval. That sounds like our kind of protection. Mara lifted a piece of bread, then lowered it again. Tomorrow we collect a mark from a man who loves marks. I can already feel the joy. They went early the next morning. The stamp office was a small hut near the gate, with a plank table, a pot of ink, and a clerk who looked like he had been born to be disappointed by handwriting. He sat upright, hands clean, eyes sharp. Eric presented the wax tablet. The clerk did not care about the list itself. He cared about the shape of it, the tidiness of it, the proof that these travellers understood the sacred relationship between goods and documentation. Leif stood beside Eric like a witness. Mara watched the clerk hands. Bran stared at the stamp, which was a piece of carved wood set into a handle, simple and terrifying in its authority. The clerk asked for names. Eric hesitated just long enough to be human, then answered, Miklagard. The clerk finally showed interest. Not much, but enough to change the air. He looked them over again, as if judging whether they were the kind of people who would survive their own plans. He dipped the stamp into ink and pressed it onto a small strip of bark paper. The mark was crude but official, which was the best kind of official. He handed it over and held out his hand for the fee. Eric paid. The clerk tucked the coin away and nodded once. Outside, Mara turned the stamped strip in her fingers. I will admit it, she allowed. I feel slightly safer. Leif wrote a note. Paper shield acquired. Bran adjusted the cargo lashings. I feel safer because the boat is good. Eric put the paper strip in the same pouch as the wax tablet, close enough that order could protect it. Then he looked out toward the river again. Holmgard behind them felt heavy with commerce. Ahead, the water road stretched south with more markets and more toll posts. Somewhere far beyond, the Dnieper rapids waited like a story people told to make children behave. And beyond even that, Miklagard waited with its walls, its customs houses, and its coin checkers who would probably smile politely while inspecting every hope they carried. They returned to the boat, pushed off, and let the river take them. The docks shrank, the market noise softened, and the world narrowed back to water, oars, and the steady rhythm of travel. Leif wrote one more line, then closed his book. The river looks calm. That means it is thinking. Mara watched the current. Then we will think calmly back. Bran nodded to the boat. The boat approves. Eric did not answer. He touched the wax tablet through the pouch, felt the familiar shape, and let the presence of the cargo list steady his breathing. The list wanted a quiet life. The river wanted a story. They would negotiate. Chapter 4. Portage, the slow sport of heroes. The first portage announced itself in the simplest way. The river stopped being helpful. The channel narrowed, the current sped up, and the water began to talk louder against stone. Ahead, a shallow stretch rippled like an irritated brow. The boat could have tried to slide through, but sliding through was a word people used when they meant scraping and praying at the same time. Bran guided them toward a calm bank. He stepped into the shallows, tested the bottom with his foot, then nodded like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. We will walk the boat. Mara looked at the bank, then at the rollers lashed to the side. Of course we will. Leif opened his book and added a line. Portage begins, dignity ends. Eric climbed out and pulled the boat farther onto the muddy edge. The hull settled with a soft groan, not from pain, but from the indignity of being treated like an object instead of a proud river craft. Bran ran his hands along the planks, murmuring reassurance that sounded suspiciously like flattery. They unloaded the heaviest cargo first, not all of it, just enough that the boat could be persuaded to move without removing their souls in the process. Eric set the bundles in careful piles on a cloth. He rearranged them twice, because even in the forest he could not stop arranging. The cargo list did not mention mud, but the list did not rule the world. Mud did. Bran laid down the first rollers, thick, smooth logs that looked like they had been waiting for this moment their whole lives. He positioned them with a craftsman attention that made the act seem ceremonial. Mara helped push. Leif helped push while maintaining a posture that implied he was being helpful only because he pitied the world. They heaved the boat forward. The hull slid onto the first roller. The roller turned, creaked, and did its job with steady loyalty. Then the next roller took the weight, then the next. It was slow. It was loud in the small way of hard work, breath and boots and wood on wood. It was the opposite of heroic, which meant it was real. Eric moved ahead, placing rollers, then moving back to help push. His hands got muddy, his sleeves got muddy. His face stayed calm, because calm was cheaper than complaint. Mara wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist and looked at the path ahead. It was not long, but it was long enough to make your mind try to bargain. Leif, breathing harder than he preferred, muttered a line that sounded like a prayer. "Next time I choose a profession where the ground remains under me." Bran moved beside the hull like a shepherd guiding a stubborn sheep. He adjusted the angle, nudged the bow, corrected small drifts before they became large problems. The boat responded, which was proof that Bran had built it properly. Even on land it listened. They reached a slightly higher patch where the rollers sank less. Progress improved. Spirits did not, but progress did. The forest around them was quiet, watching with the indifferent gaze of trees that had seen far worse people do far worse things. Halfway through the portage, a figure appeared on the path ahead. A man stood with his arms folded, leaning against a tree like the tree owed him rent. He wore a rough cloak, carried a short stick, and had a face that tried hard to look official. He walked closer, slow and deliberate, the way someone approaches when they already know what they want. "Toll," he announced. Eric stopped pushing. Mara stopped wiping her forehead. Leif stopped breathing for a moment, which was ambitious. Bran rested his hands on the hull. "There is no post here," he observed. The man shrugged. "There is now." Leif opened his book, not to write, but to remind himself that paper existed and could be trusted. Mara looked at the man's shoes, then his hands, then the stick. Not a weapon, more like a prop. A man performing authority on an empty stage. Eric stepped forward, calm and tired. "What is the toll for?" "Passage," the man answered, as if the word explained itself. "Passage over whose land?" Eric asked. The man gestured vaguely at everything. "This." Mara exhaled slowly. "I admire your claim. It is bold. It is also convenient." The man narrowed his eyes. 2 coins. Leif made a small sound, half cough, half laugh. "This is the same price as a dock fee in a busy market. You have priced your tree very high." The man lifted his stick slightly, as if the stick could support his argument. "You want trouble." Mara stepped closer, still calm. "We want quiet. That is the whole theme of our lives. You want coins, we understand. But this is not your portage." The man looked past them at the boat, the cargo, the rollers. His gaze lingered the way hunger lingers. He saw their work. He saw their tiredness. He saw an easy moment. Eric reached into his pouch, then paused. His fingers touched the stamped strip from Holmgard, the paper shield. He pulled it out and held it up. "We have passage mark for this route." The man stared at it. His face changed slightly. Not fear, more like disappointment that paperwork existed. Leif leaned in, voice mild. "There is an office in Holmgard. They love stamping. They love records. They also love asking questions about men who charge fees without posts." The man shifted his weight. The forest stayed quiet, as if listening for the outcome. Mara kept her tone soft. You can go, you can forget this, or you can take 1 coin as a gift for your imagination, and then you can go. Bran added, almost kindly, if you insist on 2, we will remember your face, and we have time to talk about faces in every inn we visit. We talk a lot at night. It helps us sleep. The man hesitated, calculating. 1 coin was better than none. 2 coins might cost him more than it earned. He held out his hand anyway, but less confidently now. Eric placed 1 coin in the palm. The man closed his fingers around it quickly, as if the coin might run away, then stepped back and pointed down the path with a grand gesture. Pass, he allowed. Mara nodded politely. Thank you for your generous permission to continue existing. The man disappeared into the trees, taking his stick and his small victory. The portage resumed, the rollers creaked again, breath returned to normal. Leif wrote a line with dark satisfaction. Note: paper shield worked, tree man underperformed. They finished the portage by late afternoon. The river on the far side was calmer, deeper, and willing to carry them again. They slid the boat into the water and let it float, and the relief was immediate, like stepping back into your own body after borrowing someone else. They loaded the cargo, checked the lashings, and pushed off. The boat moved forward with gratitude. Bran patted the gunwale like a friend. They found a quiet campsite along a bend, where the bank rose gently and the trees offered shelter. No inn tonight, just fire, food, and the sort of silence that felt earned. Mara made a small fire with practiced hands. Bran set up a simple shelter with a cloth and poles. Leif sat on a log and counted coins quietly, not because he liked counting, but because he liked knowing. Eric sat slightly apart and took out the wax tablet. He updated the cargo list, adding 1 detail that no list wanted. 1 coin, lost to a man with a tree. He stared at the line for a moment, then smoothed the wax and rewrote it more neatly, because neatness was a form of protest. Mara brought him a cup of warm brew, herbs steeped in river water boiled long enough to be safe and bitter enough to be honest. She handed it over and sat nearby. You did well, she noted. Calm, clean, no shouting. Leif looked up from his coins. I had a speech prepared. It was beautiful. It contained several insults that sounded like compliments. Bran stared into the fire. The boat did not like being on land, he said, but it tolerated it. That is the best any of us can do. The fire crackled. The river moved in the dark. Somewhere in the trees an animal shifted and then decided it was not worth approaching. The crew ate in silence for a while, tiredness softening everything. After food, Leif took out his book again. He read back the day, as if reviewing a contract. Portage took most of the day. 1 unofficial toll, 1 coin. No injuries, cargo stable, boat stable, morale damaged but recoverable. Mara tilted her head. How do you measure morale? Leif tapped the page. Number of complaints avoided. Bran nodded. That seems accurate. Eric finished the cargo list and put the tablet away. He looked at the river, then at the dark line of trees, then at the small fire that held back the night. Tomorrow there would be more water. Probably more portage, more markets, more fees from people with boards, sticks, stamps, and opinions. They were travelling toward Miklagard, and Miklagard was famous for walls, wealth, and rules. The rules would come with clerks who did not hide in trees. That was an improvement, but only a small walk. Mara leaned back and let her eyes half close. We will sleep. We will wake. We will look unbothered. We will pay less because of it. Leif closed his book. I will practice my unbothered face. Bran added, the boat has already mastered it. Eric let the rhythm of the river settle his breathing. The cargo list was safe. The stamped paper was safe. The spoon was still safe, which mattered more than it should. The fire burned low. The night stayed quiet. The road to Miklagard continued, slow and steady, 1 roller, 1 receipt, 1 calm breath at a time. Chapter 5. Smolensk and the Market of Useful Lies. The river carried them south with the patience of a long story. Some days it moved like a slow breath. Other days it moved like it had remembered something urgent and wanted to get there first. This morning it was somewhere in between, a steady pull that made the oars feel honest and the boat feel like it had a purpose beyond being dragged over land. The banks changed little by little, the trees leaned differently, the water smelled different, less lake, more river, more silt and distant smoke. Small landings appeared and disappeared, some with a shed and a dog, some with nothing but a worn patch of mud where boats had learned to stop. The crew settled into their travel rhythm without ceremony. Bran checked lashings, Mara listened to the air, Leif wrote until his charcoal went blunt and then sharpened it again. Eric kept the cargo list close, not because it solved problems, but because it kept problems from multiplying inside his head. Around midday the river traffic thickened. Boats passed more often, some headed north with southern goods stacked under cloth, some headed south with wax and honey and furs packed tight. Faces looked tired but purposeful. Everyone had the same look around the eyes, the look of someone who had learned the true geography of the route. Note rivers and lakes, fees and pauses. Smolensk announced itself with noise first. Not loud noise, just layered noise, like a cloth woven from voices, footsteps and wood on wood. Then came the docks, more organized than a small landing, less organized than a city that pretended to be polite. Then came the smell. Smoke, fish, bread, and the sharp, clean sting of metal where coins changed hands. Eric guided the boat toward an open stretch of dock and tied up the knot held. The post held. The marker system here was different, which meant someone would explain it at length and then charge for the explanation. A clerk approached with a board and chalk, older than the Ladoga clerk, and better at looking bored. He studied the boat, then the cargo, then the faces like someone reading a familiar page and still find it annoying. Dock mark fee. Eric offered a coin. The clerk took it, made a small mark on the board, then handed over a strip of wood with notches cut into it. The notches looked random until you accepted that randomness was an excellent way to maintain authority. Mara turned the strip in her fingers and placed it near the bow where it could be seen. It looked like a bit of kindling dressed up for official duty. Leif wrote a line. Smolensk uses notches. Notches are never free. They stepped into the market. Smolensk market had the energy of a place that had been traded through for years and still acted surprised every morning. Stalls leaned into narrow lanes. Goods were stacked high enough to tempt gravity. Traders spoke fast and smiled in ways that meant many things and almost never meant friendship. Furs here were common, but good furs still turned heads. Wax was valued, especially clean blocks that did not smell like smoke. Honey drew attention from people who claimed they wanted it for cooking, which was a fine story and also none of anyone's business. Eric kept their trading modest at first, watching how the scales behaved. Some sellers used honest weights. Some used weights that looked honest, which was the more expensive kind of dishonesty. Leif hovered near the scales with quiet intensity, the sort of presence that made a dishonest weight feel self-conscious. Bran found a rope stool and spent too long touching rope, which made the vendor nervous. Vendors liked quick decisions. They did not like customers who treated rope like a philosophical subject. Mara drifted where conversation was thickest. She listened to what people said out loud and what they did not say at all. Smolensk was full of useful lies, the kind that smoothed trade and prevented arguments, the kind that also hid sharp edges until you put your hand on them. One man praised his own wax as if it had been blessed. A woman swore her cloth came from the far south and had never been near a goat, which was a story told for comfort. A boy insisted his fish was caught this morning, which might have been true if you measured morning as any time in the last week. Useful lies kept the market moving. Eric traded a bundle of furs for silver and a small stack of fine needles, because needles were quiet power. He traded wax for dried fruit and good salt. The salt seller smiled like a person who knew exactly how much you needed salt and how little dignity you would retain while buying it. Leif noted the prices and muttered about them under his breath like a man reciting warnings. Bran returned with new rope and an expression that suggested he had been forced into human interaction. The rope seller asked where we are going, he announced. Mara looked over. That is normal, Bran continued. I said south. Leif nodded. Safe answer. Bran continued. He asked again. Eric looked up from a stool. And you said... Bran hesitated. I said Miklagard. Mara sighed softly. That is also normal. People like saying the name. Bran looked uncomfortable. He smiled in a way that was not a real smile. The seller smiled back in a way that was entirely real. Then he offered to sell me a charm for safe passage past the rapids. Leif wrote another line, Smolensk sells safety by the inch. Eric did not smile, he did not frown either. He simply continued trading, careful and steady. If Miklagard was a magnet, the name pulled attention. Attention pulled questions, questions pulled fees. The trick was to answer without feeding the appetite. By afternoon they returned to the boat with purchases wrapped and tied. Eric checked the cargo list against the bundles and jars. He did not trust memory. Memory was a liar that believed it was helpful. Mara sat on the dock edge and watched the crowd. A group of men moved through the market with the steady pace of people who were not shopping. Their eyes flicked over boats, over cargo, over faces. They did not smile, they did not rush. Leif followed her gaze. Toll collectors, or the kind of people who enjoy pretending. Bran adjusted a strap. They will come here. Eric tucked the wax tablet away. Then we will be boring. That evening they chose an inn near the docks, because distance from docks meant walking, and walking meant getting noticed by people who had extra time. The inn was long and low, with benches that had been carved by years of restless knives. The keeper took payment without warmth, then pointed them toward a corner where the floorboards looked slightly less angry. They settled in. Food came in bowls that had seen better lives. The stew tasted like it had been made by someone who respected survival and did not believe in joy. Bread was better, which was the only reason bread had been invented. They ate and listened. A trader nearby talked about a portage point where rollers were scarce and tempers were common. Another complained about a toll post that charged for the same passage twice, once on the water and once on the shore, as if the river and the bank belonged to different imaginary kingdoms. Someone else spoke about Kiev and the way fees there came in choruses. Mara listened with half a smile and a steady gaze. The stories were familiar, but each telling carried new details, and details were the closest thing to armor they owned. After eating, Eric took out the wax tablet and began updating the cargo list. He worked by firelight, stylus moving in steady strokes. Leif sat close enough to see the lines. He had the expression of someone watching a ritual. Bran leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes, not asleep, just resting his patience. Mara cleaned the good spoon with care and tucked it away again. The spoon had become a symbol now, which was ridiculous. Ridiculous symbols were the hardest ones to lose. A stranger approached their corner without asking. Not aggressive, not loud, just confident enough to be dangerous. He was lean, dressed plainly, with hands that looked clean for someone who travelled. His eyes were calm, too calm for an inn full of tired people. He stopped at a polite distance and looked at the wax tablet. Neat writing. Eric did not look up immediately. Neat writing prevents confusion. The stranger nodded like someone who agreed, or like someone who had heard the line before. Heading south. Leif closed his book halfway, not as a threat, more as a signal. Many people head south. The stranger smiled slightly. True. Not all of them head to Miklagard. Mara watched him without softness. The rope seller told you. The stranger made a small gesture that could have meant anything. Markets talk, inns listen. I prefer to be informed. Bran opened his eyes. Informed about what exactly? The stranger sat on the edge of a nearby bench as if invited by the concept of benches. About toll posts. About who is collecting and who is pretending. About which portage paths are watched. About which stories are useful. Eric finally looked up. Calm face, steady eyes. And what do you collect? The stranger held his hands open, empty. Information. It weighs less than wax and travels farther. Leif made a small sound of agreement and displeasure. Information also costs more than wax. The stranger nodded. Fair. Here is a piece then. The toll post on the next stretch has a new clerk. He likes receipts. He loves them. He also loves making them wrong. Mara tilted her head. Wrong how? Wrong like a shoe that fits until you walk. He will write a smaller payment than you give. Later, another man will claim you underpaid and demand the difference. The receipt will nod along, because paper will say anything if the ink is convincing. Eric frowned slightly. Not anger, more like someone tasting bad soup. And what do you recommend? The stranger leaned forward a little, voice still low. Pay in a way that leaves a trace you control, mark your own record, get a witness, make the clerk repeat the amount out loud. Quietly. Make him feel observed without feeling challenged. Leif opened his book again and wrote quickly. His eyes stayed on the page, but the tension in his shoulders eased a fraction. Practical advice was soothing. Mara studied the stranger face. Why tell us? The stranger shrugged. Because I like traders who travel with lists. They tend to survive. And because if you reach Miklagard, you will tell others what happened. That will make the route slightly less profitable for men who enjoy profit without effort. I dislike them. Bran snorted softly. A moralist. The stranger smiled. No, just selective. Eric set the wax tablet down. If this is free advice, it is the best kind. Nothing is free, Leif muttered. The stranger stood. Then call it a trade. I give you one warning, you give me one truth. How far behind you are the men who charged you for a tree? Mara blinked once. That happened once. The stranger nodded, satisfied. Then they will try it again, somewhere else, with a different tree and a different face. Keep your paper shield ready. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. In Smolensk, do not let anyone carry your bundles for you. They will carry them into a story you do not enjoy. Mara watched him go. No name, no handshake, no warmth. Just a trail of calm that felt like it had learned to walk quietly through danger. Bran leaned closer. I did not like him. Leif nodded. I liked the advice. Mara reached for the spoon pouch and patted it once, an absurd comfort gesture. I liked that he did not look at our coin pouch too long. Eric picked up the wax tablet again. He erased one line and rewrote it more carefully, then added a note at the bottom, small and neat. Next toll post. Receipts may lie. The next morning they left early. The river felt tense, not because the water had changed, but because their minds had. Smolensk slipped behind them. The market noise faded. The route narrowed into a quieter stretch where reeds grew thick and the current slid along like a careful thief. By late morning they reached the toll post. It was a real one this time. A small platform built out over the water. A hut. A pole with a carved marker. Two men sitting on a bench like they were waiting for an audience. One held a board and chalk. The other held nothing and still looked more dangerous. The clerk stood as they approached. He was young, clean, and pleased with himself. His eyes went first to the cargo, then to the faces. He smiled politely, the way a person smiles when they believe politeness is a tool. Toll for passage. Eric guided the boat close and tied off. He stepped onto the platform with the wax tablet in one hand and the stamped strip from Holmgard in the other. Paper shield forward. The clerk glanced at the stamp and nodded, as if greeting an old friend. Then he held out his hand. 2 coins. Leif stepped closer, book open in his hands. Receipt, please. The clerk looked mildly offended. Of course, I always provide receipts. Mara watched his chalk. Bran watched the other man on the bench. Eric watched the clerk eyes. Eric placed 2 coins in the open hand. The clerk closed his fingers, then reached for the board and began to write. Leif watched every chalk stroke. So did Mara. Quietly, calmly, like people admiring handwriting. The clerk wrote a line and held up the board for a moment. Then he reached under the board and pulled out a small slip of bark paper, copying the line onto it. Here. Eric took the slip. It said 1 coin. Silence held for a moment, as thin as a bad excuse. Mara leaned in slightly, voice calm enough to put a child to sleep. That is interesting. Leif kept his tone mild. You asked for 2. The clerk smiled again. Mistake. It happens. Eric held the slip between finger and thumb. His face stayed calm, but the air around him cooled. Then let us fix it." The clerk reached for the slip, but Eric did not hand it over. Leif spoke softly, almost kindly. "We will keep this in, and you will write a correct dead. That way your records match ours." The clerk hesitated. The other man on the bench shifted slightly, watching. Mara added, very quietly, "If you do not want to write another receipt, we can make it simple. Give back 1 coin. The receipt will be correct." The clerk looked at the coins in his pouch, then at the boat, then at the 3 faces watching his chalkboard like it was a sacred text. He swallowed once. Fine. He took out the chalk again. He wrote another slip. This time it said 2 coins. Leif watched him write it, then wrote the same line in his own book, marking the date by river position and morning light, because truth was easier to defend when it had details. Eric tucked the correct receipt away, then he held up the wrong receipt again. "And this with?" The clerk looked annoyed. "That one is invalid." Mara smiled faintly. "It is very valid. It is a record of your first thought." The clerk held out his hand. "Give it." Eric shook his head once, gentle and final. "No." The clerk looked toward the other man. The other man stayed seated, eyes half-lidded, as if weighing effort against profit. Then he made a small gesture with his hand, a casual wave that meant, "Let them go, not worth it." The clerk tightened his mouth, then stepped back. Eric walked back to the boat. They pushed off. The platform shrank behind them. The hut became a dot. The carved marker turned into a line and then nothing. Once they were out of easy earshot, Leif exhaled slowly. That was exactly as described. Mara nodded. "Useful lies. They tried to make the paper lie. We refused." Bran adjusted the oars. "The boat enjoys leaving toll posts behind." Eric took out the wax tablet and added 2 small lines to the list, written with careful restraint. "Toll paid. 2 coins. Receipt corrected. Wrong receipt kept." Mara glanced at the tablet. "You kept the wrong receipt." Eric looked up, quietly. "It cost nothing extra. It might save us later." Leif smiled slightly. A souvenir of honesty. They travelled the rest of the day in steadier quiet. The river resumed its patient pull. The banks slid by. The sun lowered. The world did not become kinder, but it became predictable again, and predictability was a kind of kindness. That night they camped instead of taking an inn. The fire was small, the food was simple, the talk stayed low. Mara cleaned the spoon and tucked it away with a little extra care. Leif wrote the day into his book, including the clerk's smile in the exact shape of the chalk marks. Bran checked the boat seams even though nothing had happened, because that was how Bran expressed peace. Eric rewrote the cargo list one more time, making the lines tidy, giving the list its quiet life as best he could. In the dark, the river moved on. Ahead were more markets, more toll posts, more portages, and eventually Kiev with its famous choir of fees. Beyond that, the rapids. Beyond that, the sea. Beyond that, Miklagard and its walls and coin checkers and customs that would look at their lives and decide what value they had. For now, they had a small fire, a steady boat, and paper that refused to behave badly. That was enough. Chapter 6. Kiev and the Choir of Fees. The river widened as if preparing itself for an important performance. The current still pulled south, but it did it with a steadier confidence, as if the water had heard the name Kiev many times and wanted to arrive on schedule. The banks grew busier, more boats, more landings, more people walking along the shore with bundles that looked heavy enough to contain entire plans. The air carried smoke from many fires, the kind of smoke that means meals, work, and rules. Rules always produced smoke, mostly from tempers. The crew approached Kiev with the careful calm of people entering a crowded room while holding something breakable. Eric kept the boat close to the shore, watching for eddies and shallows. Bran watched the wood, listening for any new creak that might be a complaint. Mara watched the docks ahead and the faces on them, not looking for danger exactly, more like looking for the shape of a problem before it learned to speak. Leif watched everything with the expression of a man already drafting a complaint he would never send. Kiev docks spread along the river like a long fence made of timber and impatience. Boats were tied 2 and 3 deep. Men shouted measurements. Women carried baskets with the steady strength of people who had carried far worse. Children darted through gaps like they owned the city, which was probably true in the only way that mattered. Eric guided the boat toward a space that looked open and safe. It looked open because 2 smaller boats had just pulled away. It looked safe because it was near a post with a carved mark that suggested official order. Eric tied up carefully and stepped onto the dock. The welcoming committee arrived immediately. Note 1 clerk, not even 2, 3. 1 carried a board and chalk. 1 carried a pouch and a smile that was too practiced. The 3rd carried nothing at all and still managed to look like the main point of the group. The boardman spoke first, voice smooth. Dock fee. Eric held out a coin. The boardman glanced at the coin like it might be incorrect on principle. Boat size fee also. Bran took a slow breath through his nose. The boat size has not changed since the last river. The smile man stepped closer. Kiev measures size with Kiev eyes. Kiev eyes are very accurate. Leif opened his book, already writing. Kiev eyes are expensive. Mara kept her voice soft. How much? The boardman made a show of thinking. 2 coins. Eric held out a second coin. The boardman frowned slightly. Cargo fee also. Eric paused. Cargo fee. The boardman nodded as if this was a sacred truth. Cargo has weight. Weight has value. Value has responsibility. Mara looked at Leif. This is poetry now. Leif wrote faster. Bad poetry with pricing. Bran lifted a hand toward the stamped strip from Holmgard, still tucked safe. Passage mark. The boardman glanced at it, nodded, then continued without shame. That is for passage. This is for docking. Different meaning. The 3rd man, the one with nothing in his hands, leaned forward slightly. The tone stayed mild. 3 coins. Eric did not argue. Arguing here would be like arguing with gravity. He paid. 3 more coins. The boardman wrote something on his chalkboard, then copied it to a slip. Leif watched the chalk strokes like a hawk watching a mouse. The slip was correct. It said 3 coins. That was almost unsettling. Mara took the slip and tucked it away. She touched the pouch with the wax tablet afterward, a quiet habit now, like putting a hand on the roof beam during a storm. They moved the boat deeper into the dock space under instruction, then tied again. The smile man offered a wooden notch marker. Mara accepted it and placed it where it could be seen and not easily taken. The smile man offered 1 more smile and gestured toward the market. Welcome to Kiev. Enjoy your stay. Leif murmured. That sounded like a threat wrapped in hospitality. Bran checked the knot a 3rd time. The knot does not trust Kiev. The market behind the docks felt larger than Smolensk and more ambitious than Holmgard. The lanes were tighter. The stalls were closer. The voices were layered in a way that turned ordinary conversation into music, except the music was mostly bargaining and irritation. Goods from the north appeared in familiar piles. Furs, wax, honey, iron. Goods from farther south appeared like a glimpse of another world. Fine cloth that felt smoother than it deserved. Glass beads that caught the light. Small pieces of metalwork that looked like patience shaped into form. Mara watched a woman examine a length of cloth with reverence. The woman did not touch it like a buyer. She touched it like a person touching a future. Eric traded carefully. In Kiev, making a bold trade felt like ringing a bell. Bells attracted clerks. Clerks attracted fees. Fees attracted regret. Eric preferred a quiet life for the cargo list, and a quiet life for himself. Leif moved through the market counting measures. Kiev had its own way of counting, which meant you had to learn it or pay for not learning it. He listened to stall owners talk about weights and units, then cross-checked with his own notes, then cross-checked with the expression on the seller face. Facial math was not perfect, but it helped. Bran found a boat supply corner and bought pitch rope and a new oar blade. The vendor tried to raise the price by praising the blade too much. Bran responded by praising the blade even more and lowering the price. The vendor blinked, then laughed, then agreed. This was the closest thing to friendship they had seen all day. Mara listened for rumors. Kiev was a river city, and rumors moved like water, fast and everywhere. She caught mention of trouble farther south, near the stretches where the river became louder and the land became more open. She heard talk of riders who watched the river road, waiting for easy moments. The talk was never direct. It was always soft. It was always framed as concern for travellers, which was a polite way to warn someone without becoming involved. She brought the rumour back to the group at a bread stall, where Eric was negotiating for dried fruit. Mara. People downstream are watching the river. Leif. People upstream watch the river too. Kiev is watching the river right now. Mara. These people watch in a different way. Bran adjusted the new oar blade, the kind of watching that charges a fee without providing a board. Eric finished the trade, then let the calm settle. We will look boring. We will keep to daylight. We will camp where we can see. That is what we can control. Leif wrote a line, then closed the book. Looking boring is our finest skill. They returned to the docks late afternoon with new supplies, fewer coins, and the mild exhaustion that came from being surrounded by people who treated money like a language and spoke it loudly. Eric checked the cargo list and updated it, then checked it again because Kiev made everyone doubt themselves. A dock clerk appeared again, different face, same board. Market return fee. Mara tilted her head. Returning to our boat costs a fee. The clerk looked confused, then recovered quickly. Dock maintenance fee. Leif opened his book. This dock maintains itself by eating coins. Eric paid 1 coin. The clerk wrote a slip without being asked. The slip was correct again. Kiev was improving their craft, which was worrying for everyone else. They chose an inn near the market edge, a long hall with raised platforms along the walls. The keeper had the calm eyes of a person who had seen every kind of traveller and never once been impressed. He accepted payment, pointed to a platform, and moved on. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of bread and wool and other people's plans. The food arrived in bowls that were not beautiful, but were honest. Stew with roots, meat, and enough salt to justify the price of salt. Bread that could survive a week. Warm drink that tasted like herbs and patience. They ate quietly at first, letting the noise of the inn become background. A merchant nearby complained about a toll post that charged extra if you looked uncertain. Another explained that some clerks would lower a fee if you brought your own slip paper, because then they could pretend they did not have supplies and charge less for the privilege of writing. Leif made a small note of this like it was a sacred secret. After food, Eric took out the wax tablet and began rewriting the cargo list. Not updating, rewriting. A clean copy, a fresh start. Kiev had a way of making everything feel slightly dirty even when nothing had touched it. Mara watched the stylus move. You rewrite like you can smooth the river. Eric kept the lines straight. I rewrite like I can smooth myself. Bran leaned back and closed his eyes. The boat does not care about lists. The boat cares about ropes. Leif held up his book. I care about lists. I care about ropes. I care about the tragic relationship between lists and ropes. Mara cleaned the spoon, then checked the spoon pouch twice. The spoon was safe. The world could collapse, but the spoon would endure. A man approached their platform. Not the stranger from Smolensk, a different kind. Older, with a neat beard and a small bag that looked heavy. His eyes were sharp but not hungry, more practical. He nodded once, a polite greeting without warmth. Travellers. Eric looked up, calm. Traders. The man gestured toward the wax tablet. Organised traders. Leif murmured, that is how it begins. The man ignored that and lowered his voice. There are posts downstream that pretend to be toll posts. There are also posts that are toll posts and still pretend. The difference matters. Mara watched him steadily. And why does it matter to you? The man shrugged slightly. Because Kiev wants traffic. Traffic brings coins. If travellers stop coming, the city loses. If the river road becomes a fear road, everyone pays more in ways they do not enjoy. Bran opened his eyes. That sounded almost civic. The man allowed a small smile. Do not misunderstand. I want business. I want it predictable. Predictable business is a kind of peace. Leif nodded slowly. That is the best kind of peace available. The man reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of parchment, folded, a route note, a list of known posts, names of people who can be paid to escort boats through certain stretches. The man held it out. Mara did not take it immediately. What is the price? The man looked at Eric, then at the wax tablet, then back. 1 coin and 1 promise. Leif leaned forward. A promise is not a coin. The man nodded. True. A promise is easier to collect later. Eric held his calm. What promise? When you reach Miklagard, tell others that Kiev treats traders fairly, for a reasonable definition of fairly. Mara smiled faintly. A reasonable definition. The man nodded, satisfied that she understood. Kiev wants a reputation that fits on a tongue and in a pocket. Eric paid 1 coin. Mara took the folded note and tucked it away with the stamped strip and the receipts. The paper pouch was becoming heavy with protection, which was a strange comfort. The man stood to leave, then paused. 1 more thing. The clerks on the lower docks, the ones who change a fee mid-sentence, do not respond well to anger. They respond well to boredom. Act like you have paid fees in greater cities. Act like their tricks are old. Leif almost smiled. Old tricks are my favourite category. The man left, blending back into the inn noise. Mara unfolded the note a little, with enough to see the ink. Names were there, place hints, short warnings. The handwriting was neat, which made it feel more trustworthy than it deserved. Eric finished the clean cargo list and set the tablet down. We leave tomorrow. Bran nodded once, early. Leif tapped the note lightly. We follow this, as much as we can. Mara tucked the note away again, and we look boring. They slept. Morning came with the usual sounds, boots on wood, low voices, the inn breathing itself awake. They returned to the boat, paid a small fee that no one could fully explain, and pushed off into the river again. Kiev slid behind them. The docks shrank. The market noise softened. The city became a memory that smelled like smoke and stew and coins. The river ahead looked calm. The banks looked open in places, forest in others. Somewhere downstream the rapids waited, though still far. Somewhere downstream the watchers waited, according to the rumours and the note, and the way the air itself felt slightly more alert. Leif wrote 1 line, then closed the book. Kiev completed its performance. The choir of fees was in tune. Mara watched the shore. Now we travel through the quiet part between songs. Bran adjusted the oar blade. The boat prefers silence. Eric touched the pouch where the wax tablet rested. The cargo list stayed neat. Their coins were fewer, their papers were more. Their calm was still intact, which in this trade was a rare profit. The river carried them south. Chapter 7. The Rapids, 7 Ways to Lose Your Composure. The river south of Kiev looked innocent in the morning, which was the first sign it was planning something. The water moved steady and smooth, carrying the boat along as if it had always wanted to be helpful. Mist hung low over the surface in thin sheets that drifted apart when the sun warmed them. The banks were quieter now, fewer docks, fewer voices, more open stretches where the trees stepped back and the sky had room to stare. The crew treated the calm like a temporary discount. Bran kept the oars moving with even rhythm, not rushing, not dragging. The boat glided as if it was saving energy for later, which was wise. It had been on this route longer than any of them, in the only way that mattered. Wood learned quickly. Mara watched the shore, not looking for a specific problem, more like listening for the shape of a future whir. There were places along the river where the grass lay flat in odd patterns, where paths met the water and then vanished again into the land. Those paths were not dangerous on their own. They were simply places where feet liked to travel. Feet did not travel for free. Leif kept his book open but wrote less. The quiet did not offer much new information. Quiet offered space for thoughts, and thoughts did not need charcoal. Eric checked the pouch with the wax tablet and the paper slips. Cargo list, stamped strip, corrected receipt, wrong receipt, Kiev route note. a small library of ways to stay alive without needing to make a scene. It was almost comforting, almost. By midday, the river began to sound different. Not loud yet, just more complicated. A low rumble under the surface, like distant carts on a rough road. The current tugged harder, the way a person tugs a sleeve to get your attention without raising their voice. Bran adjusted their line, keeping the boat centered. The hull responded with a faint shiver, as if it had recognized the sound too. Leif finally wrote again. The river is clearing its throat. Mara glanced ahead. The rapids are polite enough to warn us. Eric looked toward the water and then toward the shore. If that is the polite warning, I am not interested in the rude version. The first rapid was not a single dramatic drop. It was a stretch of water that had forgotten how to behave. Rocks rose just beneath the surface, turning smooth flow into broken waves. The boat could have tried to ride through, but the risk was not worth the pride. Pride did not pay for repairs. Bran guided them toward a small landing where the bank was worn and muddy. The ground there had the look of a place that had suffered many boats. Logs lay nearby, smoothed by use. Rollers ready for the slow sport of heroes. They unloaded some cargo, just enough to lighten the hull. Eric moved with careful hands, placing bundles on cloth, keeping them off the mud, keeping the list in his head aligned with the piles on the ground. Order was not magic, but it was a habit that reduced surprises. Mara stood a little apart and listened. The land was quiet, but not empty. The kind of quiet that made you lower your voice without being told. Leif unfolded the Kiev note and scanned the ink. There was a mark here, a short line that meant something like, "Do not linger, do not argue, do not look lost." Bran set rollers in place with practiced care. The boat slid onto the first roller. Wood turned on wood. The hull moved forward in small, stubborn increments. Portage was never a single act. It was many small acts of patience. Push, reset, move rollers, push again. Keep the boat straight, keep the cargo safe, keep breathing steady, keep the mind from wandering into complaints that would not help. The first portage around the rapid took longer than anyone wanted and less time than anyone feared. That was the best outcome available. Once the boat was back in the water below the rough stretch, everything felt calmer for a moment, even though the roar of the rapid still carried in the air behind them. They pushed off and let the current take them, and the relief was immediate. Water was their element. Land was an insult. They did not celebrate. Rapids came in sequences. A single solved problem on this route was not a victory. It was an introduction. The second rapid arrived an hour later, louder. The river narrowed and the rumble rose to a constant growl. The surface broke into fast-moving ridges. White foam flashed between dark stones. Bran guided them toward shore again. Mara pointed to a bank section where the landing looked cleaner, less churned. Cleaner landings were not always better. Sometimes they were cleaner because people avoided them. Sometimes people avoided them for reasons that did not fit well on a cargo list. They chose a landing that looked used, but not trapped. The portage path here ran through low trees and scrub. The ground was packed hard by many feet. Rollers lay scattered. Some were broken, some were missing. Missing rollers meant someone took them, or someone used them until they became something else, like firewood or regret. Bran frowned at the gaps. He carried extra rollers for this reason, because the route loved to take things from you and then charge you for the replacement. They set the rollers down, pushed the boat forward, and worked in steady silence. Halfway through the portage path, Mara noticed tracks along the edge, not fresh enough to be immediate, but fresh enough to be relevant. Many feet, not just a few. The path had been busy recently. Leif saw the same signs and wrote a short line. Activity. Eric did not look up from the boat. Keep moving. They kept moving. The boat slid forward, rollers turned, sweat built under their clothing. The air felt heavier, not from heat, but from awareness. Near the end of the path, the trees thinned and the river came back into view. The water below the rapid moved fast, but smoother, as if proud of itself for returning to civilization. On the far side of the river, a small group of riders stood still on a rise. Too far to see faces clearly, close enough to feel watched. Horses were patient silhouettes. The riders did not wave, they did not shout, they simply existed in a way that made the air feel narrower. Mara kept her expression calm, even though her shoulders tightened slightly, looking boring, looking unbothered, looking like this was normal. Leif kept his book closed, which was a sign of seriousness. Writing felt too loud now. Bran adjusted a roller with deliberate care, as if the angle of a log could improve the whole situation. But the boat moved forward one more step, then another. Eric kept the pace steady, no rush that would look like fear, no slowness that would look like weakness. Just the same calm work as always, like they portaged every day and did not care who watched. They reached the water, they slid the hull in, they loaded the cargo quickly but neatly. Eric did not allow frantic hands. Frantic hands dropped things. Dropped things became stories, and stories attracted attention. When they pushed off, the current took them immediately, carrying the boat away from the landing and into the main flow. The riders remained still on the rise, watching them drift past. Then the boat turned slightly with the current, and the riders slipped out of view behind trees. Only then did the crew let themselves breathe more fully. Leif opened the book and wrote a single sentence. Boring worked. Mara stared at the water for a long moment. That was watching, not greeting. Bran kept the oars moving. The boat wants distance. Eric touched the pouch with the papers. Distance is a fine form of payment. The third rapid arrived late afternoon. This one was larger, and the roar was louder, and the water looked less like water and more like a crowded argument. The river broke around rocks in chaotic patterns. Foam boiled and spun. The air above the rapid felt damp and cold, sprayed by the constant motion. They did not even consider running it. Not today, out with cargo, out with watchers somewhere behind and possibly ahead. They found a landing and began the portage again. This time the path was longer. The ground rose slightly, then dipped. Trees closed in. The air smelled of crushed leaves and old sweat. Evidence of other crews lay scattered along the route. A broken rope end, a worn boot sole, a piece of cloth snagged on a branch. Signs of travel always looked like signs of hardship, no matter how calmly people tried to tell the story afterward. They worked until the light turned golden thin. The boat moved forward slowly, roller to roller, breath to breath. At one difficult stretch where the ground dipped, the hull threatened to slide sideways off the rollers. Bran braced against the side, pushing with his shoulder. Eric moved fast to reset the front roller. Mara and Leif shifted weight and steadied the stern. For a moment the boat leaned. The cargo shifted inside with a dull thump. Every muscle tightened, not for drama, but for prevention. Then the hull settled back onto the rollers. The boat held. The cargo stayed secured. No one spoke for a few breaths. They did not need words. They needed hands. When the boat was stable again, Leif made a tiny mark in his book, as if acknowledging the moment without letting it become a story. They finished the portage after dusk. The river below the rapid ran swift but smooth enough to travel. Still, travelling at night here felt like asking for trouble politely. They chose a campsite on a bank with a clear view up and down river, a place where the trees stood back and the sky could be seen. Leif collected stones and built a small fire ring, because having the fire behave was one problem they could actually solve. The fire burned low. They ate in quiet, chewing slowly, listening to the river and the night. The roar of the last rapid faded into distance, replaced by the softer rush of current along the bank. Eric pulled out the wax tablet and updated the cargo list. It did not include fear. It did not include watchers. It did include time lost to portage and small wear or rope. It included a note to check the hull seams in the morning. It included the simple truth that they were still intact, which mattered more than profit. Mara cleaned the spoon and tucked it away. The spoon was still safe. The world still had one small object that did not get taxed, stolen, or argued over. Leif unfolded the Kiev note again and studied it by firelight. There were more marks ahead, more rapids, more warnings. The route note did not try to scare, it simply pointed, a calm finger toward an unpleasant map. Bran checked the new oar blade and ran his thumb along the edge. Good wood, strong join. That blade would be tested soon. The night stayed quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath. Morning came with pale light and the smell of damp earth. They ate quickly and packed with the same steady discipline. The river road did not reward lingering. The fourth rapid arrived before midday. The fifth followed not long after. Some required short portages, some required longer. Each one demanded the same ritual. Unload some cargo, lay rollers, push the boat, reset rollers, keep moving, keep calm. After a while, portage became its own kind of meditation. Slow steps, steady breath, hands on wood, muscle memory. The mind could drift, but only slightly, because the path always punished wandering thoughts. Leif began counting rapids in the margins of his book, not with numbers, but with short words, 1 through 7, because the human mind needed a sense of progress. Mara watched the shore more than the water now. The water was loud but honest. The shore was quiet and complicated. At one landing, they saw another crew ahead, portaging the same path. The other crew looked tired but organized. Their cargo piles were neat. Their faces were set in calm concentration. That was a good sign. Neat cargo piles meant fewer surprises. They approached without rushing. Too close could feel threatening. Too far could feel unfriendly. They settled into a parallel pace, close enough to share the path, distant enough to keep their own space. The other crew gave a brief nod. No greeting, no question, just recognition of shared work. Shared work created temporary alliances. Temporary alliances did not require names. They portaged together for a while, 2 boats moving like slow animals over land. Rollers creaked, boots pressed dirt, breath rose and fell. At the end of that portage, the other crew launched first and drifted downstream. A small distance opened between them, like a sensible boundary. Leif wrote a line. Another crew, calm, not interested in conversation, ideal neighbors. Mara watched them go. If we see them again, it will be because the river decided we all needed company. Bran nodded. The boat likes company at a distance. The 6th rapid was the largest so far. The river narrowed hard and the roar deepened into a constant thunder that made the chest feel hollow. Foam flashed between dark stone. The water was beautiful in a way that made you respect it, and also not touch it. The portage path here was wide and worn, with evidence of many crews. Rollers were more plentiful, which meant either the route was kind here, or someone had learned that providing rollers was good business. Sure enough, a small shelter stood near the start of the path. 2 men sat beside a stack of rollers and coils of rope. They looked relaxed, too relaxed. The kind of relaxation that came from other people doing the hard work. One of them lifted a hand in greeting, which already felt like a fee. Mara watched their faces carefully. Not hostile, not friendly, just ready. Eric stepped forward and held the stamped strip from Holmgard visible, along with the Kiev note folded in his hand, paper shield and root note, both out in the open. Visible competence. The man near the rollers pointed to the stack. Rollers for hire, rope for hire, safe passage. Leif opened the book and wrote a short line. Commerce has arrived to help. Bran examined the rollers. They were good, smooth, well-sized. That was suspicious in its own way. Good tools rarely appeared without a reason. Eric kept the tone calm. We have rollers, we have rope. The man smiled slightly, as if amused by optimism. These are better. Mara stepped closer and looked at the ropes. They were indeed better. Thick, new, the kind of rope that would not snap at a bad moment. Useful if the price was not ridiculous. Leif glanced at Eric. This is where the river tries to sell us our own patience. Eric considered. The 6th rapid path was long. The boat was heavy. Extra good rope might reduce the chance of a bad slide, and a bad slide would cost more than a coin. He paid for 1 coil of rope, not because he liked paying, but because he liked choosing the payment that prevented larger payments later. A quiet investment. The man handed over the rope and then tried to offer a guide for the path. Eric refused the guide with polite finality. A guide was another person close to the cargo, and closeness invited creativity. They used the new rope to steady the boat through the longest stretch. Bran kept the angle true, Mara and Leif managed the rope tension. Eric moved rollers forward in a steady rhythm. The hull slid over land with slightly less protest. Halfway through, the two men by the shelter watched quietly, counting something in their minds. The counting did not feel friendly. It felt practical. They finished the portage and launched. The river below the sixth rapid moved swift and clean, as if proud of its own power. The boat rode the current and the shore slipped by, and the shelter disappeared behind trees. Leaf wrote a line. "We paid for rope. We did not pay for friendship." Correct. Mara watched the bank. The watchers today were merchants, not riders. Merchants watched with prices. The seventh rapid arrived in the late afternoon, smaller than the sixth but still demanding respect. One more portage. One more slow push. One more set of rollers turning under the weight of their plans. By the time they launched below it, the light was fading and their bodies felt heavy. The river ahead looked calmer. Not fully calm, but less angry. They found a campsite and made fire again. Food was simple, words were fewer. Tiredness had a way of smoothing sarcasm into something softer. Eric took out the wax tablet and rewrote the cargo list once more. Neat lines, measured spacing, the calm discipline of a person trying to prove that order still existed somewhere. Leif wrote the rapids list in full words in the margin, 1 through 7, then added a final note. "We survived the part people whisper about." Mara cleaned the spoon and tucked it away. The spoon survived too. The spoon is clearly blessed. Bran checked the hull seams and nodded. The boat survived. The boat will now demand appreciation. Eric looked at the river, then at the dark line of trees, then at the paper pouch with its stamps and receipts and warnings. They had crossed the rapids with slow work, careful choices, and the simple art of looking unbothered while being very bothered inside. Ahead was the river running toward the sea. Ahead were new kinds of fees, not rocks and rollers, but wind and salt and officials who did not hide behind trees. Officials preferred desks. For now, the night was quiet. The water moved steady. The fire burned low. The cargo list rested in its pouch, still neat, still stubborn, still trying to live a quiet life in a world that insisted on charging for movement. Chapter 8. St. George Island and Black Sea Manners. After the rapids, the river behaved like a person who had finished shouting and now wanted credit for being calm. The current still moved fast, but it moved in smoother lines. The roar faded into memory, the banks opened wider, the air changed, carrying more damp salt hints, even before the sea was visible, as if the world was preparing their noses for a different kind of trouble. They travelled with a new kind of tiredness, the one that arrives after you survive what people whisper about. It was not muscle tiredness, it was mind tiredness, the kind that makes silence feel friendly and sarcasm feel like a warm coat. Bran kept the boat moving in an even rhythm. The oars dipped, the hull slid through the water like it had regained self-respect. The new rope coil stayed stowed, still clean, which felt like a small victory. Clean tools were rare gifts. Life wrote less now, not because there was nothing to record, but because the rapids had already filled a page with the kind of information that did not need repeating. He did keep one list going. Things that worked, paper shields, correct receipts, looking boring, good rope, tight lashings. The list of survival was shorter than the list of fears, which was comforting in its own way. Mara watched the sky more than the shore. Down here the sky mattered. Wind mattered. Clouds mattered. A wrong wind could turn a calm day into a lesson. Mara treated the weather the way Eric treated tollposts, with steady attention and no trust. Eric checked the cargo list each morning and each evening, adjusting it to match reality, because reality liked to move items around when no one was looking. Furs still dry, wax still sealed, honey jars still wrapped, iron chest still locked, coins still fewer, paper pouch still thicker. The paper pouch had become its own cargo, heavier than it should have been. Stamped strip, correct receipts, wrong receipt, route note, a small library of proof, and proof was a kind of currency. By midday the river widened into a broad mouth. The water tasted different in the air. The smell shifted, more open, more sharp. The banks lowered and the land flattened. Reed beds spread wide. Birds gathered and lifted in waves. The boat rode a gentle swell that did not feel like river motion anymore. It felt like the start of sea motion, a kind of motion that did not care about your plans. Leif finally spoke without writing first. "We are close." Mara kept her eyes on the horizon line, close to the sea. Bran nodded once, close to Win. Eric touched the pouch with the wax tablet, close to new kinds of fees. They moved carefully, following channels where the water was deep enough to trust. Sandbars waited in silence, hidden just beneath the surface. Sandbars were honest in one way. They did not ask for coins. They simply stopped you and let you pay in time and effort. Near late afternoon, they reached a low island stop that travelers used before pushing into the open Black Sea route. The island was not large, but it sat in a useful place. A patch of higher ground, a few trees, a landing that looked worn by many ropes, and the remains of fire pits that suggested many crews had come here to rest, to plan, and to pretend they were not nervous. This was St. George Island, at least by the name the route note used, and by the way other crews mentioned it with the calm seriousness reserved for places that kept people alive. They guided the boat toward the landing and tied up. The water here moved with a strange mixture of river push and sea pull. The boat bobbed gently, as if testing the new rhythm. A small cluster of other boats were already anchored nearby. Crews moved about quietly, not with fear, but with focus. Ropes were checked, sails were adjusted, cargo was shifted and covered. People spoke in low voices, as if loud voices might offend the water. Eric stepped onto the island ground and felt the difference immediately. River landings felt like edges. This felt like a threshold. Mara drew in a slow breath. "I do not like threshold places." Leif opened his book, then closed it again. "This is not a fee place. This is a planning place." Bran crouched by the boat and ran his hand along the hull. The boat feels it too. Different water, different manners. They set up a small camp near the landing, close enough to the boat to keep it in sight, far enough that sparks would not land on rope. The fire was small. The goal was warmth and tea, not attention. Mara gathered driftwood and scrub branches. The wood here smelled different, more salt-touched, like it had already learned the sea language. Bran rigged a simple shelter cloth low, because wind here liked to arrive without warning. Leif scanned the other crews, not staring, just noting. Eric laid the cargo cloths out and checked every tie. As the light faded, a man from another crew approached. He did not come too close. He stopped at a polite distance and lifted one hand in a gesture that meant greeting without obligation. His clothing was plain, his face looked like it had been weathered by wind and negotiation. His eyes went to the boat, then to the cargo, then to their hands. Hands told the truth. Calm hands told the best truth. Mara watched him steadily. The man spoke in a low tone. "Weather tomorrow." Mara answered in the same tone. "Wind from the east." The man nodded. "Stronger by midday. Better to leave early if crossing." Leif finally wrote a line. "Advice without invoice. Rare." Eric responded with calm politeness. "Thank you." The man hesitated as if weighing another sentence, then offered one more piece. "Keep close to the coast until the water calms. Do not chase speed. The sea punishes pride." Bran gave a small nod. "The boat also punishes pride." The man almost smiled, then returned to his crew without pressing for conversation. That was the island way. Exchange what helps. Do not linger. Do not become part of someone else's problem. They ate simple food. Bread, dried fish, dried fruit that tasted like it had traveled through too many hands, warm brew that tasted like herbs negotiating with salt. The air cooled quickly. The sky widened. Stars appeared in hard, bright points. Out on the darker water, small lights moved where boats anchored. Leif broke the silence. "It is almost peaceful." Mara gave him a sideways look. "Do not curse us with hope." Leif shrugged slightly. "I did not say it would remain peaceful. I said it was almost." Eric took out the wax tablet and updated the cargo list. Then he stared at the list for a moment, stylus hovering. The list felt strange here. On rivers, a cargo list was a tool. On the sea, a cargo list was a prayer to gravity. Bran adjusted a rope coil near the boat. If the wind rises, the sail will do most of the work. That means we must trust cloth and knots. Mara looked at the shelter cloth. Cloth and knots. The foundation of civilization. Leif smiled faintly. Civilization is cloth and knots held together by fees. They slept lightly. The island night did not feel unsafe, but it felt alert. The wind shifted twice. The boat tugged at its line like a restless animal. Somewhere nearby, a crew spoke quietly in a language they did not fully understand, but the meaning was clear enough. Prepare. Do not be foolish. Leave early. Morning came pale and cool. Mist lay low over the water. The island smelled of damp earth and salt. Their fire coals still held a faint warmth. Mara fed them a little wood and made a quick warm drink. Bran checked the sail and lines. Leif checked the sky. Eric checked the cargo lashings. They pushed off before the sun fully rose, slipping away from the island like people leaving an inn without wanting to talk to the keeper. The water beyond the river mouth felt different under the hull. The boat no longer moved only with current, it moved with swell. A gentle lift and fall that made the stomach remember it existed. Bran raised the sail part way, not fully, letting it catch just enough wind to help without letting it command. The sail filled and pulled. The boat responded and angled toward the coast. They stayed close to the shoreline, as advised. Land on the right, open water on the left. The coast was low and irregular, broken by reeds and small rises. There were no grand cliffs, no dramatic markers, just a line of earth that meant you still had an exit if the sea decided to change its tone. The wind was mild at first, the boat moved smoothly, the crew settled into a new rhythm. Less oar work, more sail adjustment. Less river steering, more reed wind. Leif opened his book and wrote again, careful to keep the pages dry. Sea travel begins. River habits must behave. Mara kept her eyes on the horizon and the water surface. Small ripples told stories, dark patches told other stories. The sea did not speak in words, it spoke in patterns. Eric held the wax tablet inside the pouch and touched it occasionally as if checking a heartbeat. It was an odd comfort. But comfort did not need to be logical to be useful. By midday the wind rose. Not sudden, but steady, like someone turning a dial. The sail pulled harder. The boat leaned slightly and cut through the water with more speed. The coast slid past faster. The open water looked less friendly, darker and deeper, a wide surface that could swallow thoughts. Bran adjusted the sail angle. The boat responded, but the hull also began to slap more sharply against small waves. The sound was not loud, but it was insistent, like someone knocking on a door you were trying to ignore. Mara tightened a rope on a cargo cover. "Wind is awake now," Leif wrote. "Wind is awake. Everyone else must pretend they are calm." Eric kept his face calm. They had practice. They had looked unbothered through rapids. Wind was different, but it was still just an element with opinions. A larger wave lifted the bow and dropped it. The boat slapped down. A jar inside gave a soft clink. Eric froze for half a breath, then moved quickly to check the lashings over the honey jars. The cloth padding held. The jars stayed in place. No leakage, no sticky disaster, no new entry on the cargo list that would read honey everywhere. He let out a slow breath, quiet relief. One problem prevented before it could become a story. They brought the boat in and tied up. The moment the line went taut, a man appeared on the dock with the familiar look of someone who had been waiting for this exact rope. Dock fee. Eric handed over a coin without pause, almost out of habit. The man accepted it and then looked at the sail. Sail fee. Mara blinked slowly. "We pay extra for moving in a way you approve of." The man shrugged, expression calm. "Sailing uses wind. Wind belongs to the coast." Leif wrote a line and then paused to admire it. "Wind belongs to the coast. I would like this written on a stone so future travellers can laugh at it properly." Bran kept his hands on the rope and his face calm. "How much?" 2 coins. Eric paid because daylight was fading and arguing would be expensive. The man gave a small wooden marker as if granting them membership in the dock society. They stepped into the settlement. It was quieter than Kiev, smaller than Smolensk. Still, it had the same market pulse. Fish, salt, bread, rope, cloth. small goods that helped you survive the next stretch. People here looked at travelers with the steady practicality of those who lived where routes passed. Travelers were weather. You prepared for them, profited from them, and then watched them move on. They bought fresh water and extra bread. They bought a small amount of oil for lamps, because nights on the coast could be darker than expected. They paid more than the items were worth. Coastal places always charged for the fact that you needed them. They found an inn, a low building with a smoky room and benches worn smooth. The keeper took payment and pointed to a corner. The keeper face was the same as all keepers, tired but efficient, like someone who had learned that warmth was a limited resource. They ate fish stew that tasted like salt and resignation. They drank warm brew. They listened to other crews talk in low tones about the sea, about wind shifts, about coastal checkpoints, about the great city ahead where the walls were high and the rules were higher. One traveller described Miklagard with awe, which was a dangerous emotion. Awe made you careless. Careless made you pay. Mara leaned close to Eric and kept her voice low. When we see the walls, do not stare. Staring is a kind of poverty. Eric kept his eyes on his bowl. I will treat the walls like a clerk. Polite, brief, no admiration. Leaf wrote, treat wonders like paperwork. Survival tip. Bran rested his hands on his knees. The boat will be happier once we are inside a harbour. Mara looked at him. You trust harbours. Bran shrugged slightly. Harbours have rules. Sea has moods. That night, Eric rewrote the cargo list again, not because it changed, but because rewriting was a way to settle the mind. The list stayed neat. The paper pouch stayed safe. The wrong receipt stayed tucked away like a small weapon made of chalk. Morning brought a calmer wind, then a sharper wind, then a calmer wind again because the sea enjoyed variety. They pushed off early and followed the coast again. The land stayed visible, a comfort line. The boat moved in gentle swells, the sail pulled steady. By midday the water began to show more traffic, more boats heading the same direction, some larger, some smaller. Some flying cloths that marked groups, traders, pilgrims, crews with escorts, crews who looked like they had paid for the privilege of not being alone. Leif wrote. Increased traffic, closer to rules. Mara watched the boats, closer to Miklagard. The afternoon light shifted, turning the water a darker blue, then grey. The wind settled into a steadier direction. The boat made good progress. The coastline began to hint at something bigger ahead, not visible yet but felt, a kind of weight in the air, like the world was holding its breath before showing you a massive thing. Late in the day, a distant shape appeared along the horizon, not clear at first, just a darker line that did not move like land. It looked too straight, too deliberate. Mara saw it first, and did not point. Pointing was a kind of excitement. Leif saw it next and stopped writing. Even his charcoal respected the moment. Bran adjusted the sail slightly, as if preparing the boat posture for the sight. Eric looked, and his calm held, but his eyes tightened a little. The line grew clearer as they moved. A wall line, a human line, something built to be seen and to be feared and to be measured in fees. Miklagard was still far, still hours and possibly a day away, but its presence had arrived early. It did that. Great cities sent their shadows ahead. Leif finally wrote one line, slow and careful. The great city is visible. Everyone must pretend this is normal. Mara looked at the wall line and then back to the water. Tomorrow we become civilized. Bran nodded. The boat will try to behave. Eric touched the pouch with the tablet and the paper slips, feeling the weight of lists and proof. Tomorrow we meet officials with better clothing and sharper pens. The boat continued forward on the darkening water, sail full, hull steady. The wind cooled, the sky deepened. Behind them, the river mouth and St. George Island were already memory, a threshold crossed. Ahead the walls waited, and the customs desks, and the coin checkers who could hear dishonestest in metal. For tonight they found a sheltered spot along the coast and anchored. The fire on shore was small, the food was simple. The talk was low. They rested, because tomorrow would demand calm faces, clean hands, and the most difficult skill of all, looking unbothered while standing in a line. Chapter 9. Miklagard Walls, and the gentle squeeze of customs. The walls grew from a line into a presence, and the presence grew into a decision the sky had to work around. Even at a distance, Miklagard did not look like a city that expected to be surprised. It looked like a city that expected to be paid attention to, and would charge for the privilege. The approach by water felt different from river travel. The sea did not narrow into a path for you. It widened and offered options, and then the walls made every option feel like the same path. Boats converged toward the same stretches of sheltered water, guided by currents, by coast, and by the shared understand that you did not invent your own harbour rules in a place like that. More craft appeared as they drew near, fishing boats moving low and quick, larger trading vessels sitting heavy in the water, their decks crowded with bundles and bodies. Patrol craft moving with purpose, not rushing, but making sure everyone noticed the purpose. Leif stopped writing for a while. Even his book seemed to understand that this moment would not benefit from commentary, it would benefit from breathing. Mara kept her gaze on the water surface and the space between boats. In crowded waters, danger was rarely dramatic. It was usually a rope, a misjudged turn, a sudden gust, a careless oar. Bran adjusted the sail and then lowered it gradually as the harbour water became calmer. Oars took over again, softer work, more control, less invitation for the wind to improvise. Eric checked the cargo covers and the lashings one more time. The boat was clean enough, the goods were hidden enough, the papers were readied. The cargo list rested in its pouch like a small stubborn saint. The stamped strip from Holmgard sat beside receipts and the Kiev note. Proof was packed tighter than wax. The harbour entrance narrowed between structures that looked like they had been built by a people who loved stone and disliked surprises. A line of boats moved slowly toward a checkpoint platform. No one shouted. Everyone waited. Waiting was the first lesson here. They joined the line. A patrol craft moved along the side, 2 men standing at the bow watching. Their clothing looked better than river clothes. Their faces looked the same as every face that had ever held authority. Calm, certain, mildly tired of you already. Mara leaned close to Eric, barely moving her lips. Remember, no staring. Eric kept his eyes on the water just ahead of the bow. I am not staring. I am appreciating from a safe distance. Leif finally wrote one line, careful and small. Appreciation is a taxable emotion. The line inched forward. Oars dipped. Boats crept. Ropes creaked. The walls rose higher as if enjoying their own impact. Ahead, the checkpoint platform held a small structure and a wide table. People moved around it with tidy purpose. Papers were passed, hands were held out, coins changed owners. A guard watched everything with the relaxed posture of someone standing near a rule that could become a problem if needed. When their turn came, Bran brought the boat alongside and tied off. The knot was good, the line was tight. The boat sat steady, which felt like a small triumph. Eric stepped onto the platform with the pouch of papers and the wax tablet. Leif followed with the book, not hidden, not waved, simply present. Mara stayed near the boat edge, watching hands and faces. Bran remained with the boat, one hand on a rope, one eye on the crowd. A clerk stood behind the table, neat clothing, neat hair, and the expression of someone who believed in systems the way priests believed in altars. A second clerk sat nearby with a smaller table, a small set of tools, and a tray of coins that looked like they were waiting to be judged. The first clerk extended a hand, palm up, and did not smile. Papers. Eric placed the stamped strip and receipts on the table along with the wax tablet. He did not dump the pouch. Dumping looked nervous. He placed items as if he had done this many times, which was almost true now. The clerk scanned the stamped strip, then the receipts. He paused at the wrong receipt, the one that showed 1 coin. Eric had kept it tucked behind the correct one on purpose. It was a small habit now, keeping proof of mistakes like a quiet weapon. The clerk touched the wrong receipt with 2 fingers and looked up. This. Leif leaned forward slightly. That is a record of an attempted error. The corrected receipt is also present. The clerk blinked once, slow. A small pause, like a person deciding if this was worth caring about. Then he set the wrong receipt aside without comment and focused on the correct one. That was the best outcome, not approval, not praise, just movement. The clerk asked for names. Eric gave them. He asked for origin. Eric gave the North in a calm phrase that did not invite questions. He asked for cargo. Eric opened the wax tablet and showed the list. Furs, wax, honey, iron, amber, cloth. The clerk nodded and made a mark on his paper. He gestured toward the second table. Coin check. Mara shifted her weight, very slightly. Leif stopped writing. Bran kept his hand on the rope and made his face even calmer, which was impressive. At the second table, the coin checker looked up. The coin checker was a woman with sharp eyes and steady hands. Her hair was tied back neatly. She wore a small apron that looked like it had been designed for work, not ceremony. The tray of coins in front of her were arranged in tidy rows, and the rows felt like a warning. Eric placed a small selection of their coins on the table, not all of them, just enough to show they were not hiding and not careless. Coins for fees, coins for early market work, coins for lodging, coins for surviving the first week of being looked at by officials. The coin checker picked up the first coin and turned it in the light. She listened to it when she tapped it gently against another coin. The sound was bright, clean. She nodded and set it down. She picked up the next, turned it, tapped it, listened again. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not anger, more concentration. She tapped it again, then placed it aside in a different spot. Mara watched the different spot and felt her spine tighten, just a little. A different spot was how problems began, quietly. Leif leaned closer, still calm. Is there an issue? The coin checker held up the coin between finger and thumb. Not an issue yet. It is thin. Eric kept his face neutral. It came to us in trade. The coin checker nodded, as if she had expected that answer and already had a reply ready. Many coins come to people in trade. That does not make them whole. She tapped the coin again, then set it down. She picked up another and listened, then another. The work was steady and almost gentle. It was also absolute. The kind of gentleness that did not care if you felt uncomfortable. The first clerk at the main table watched the process without interest. This was normal here. Coins were checked like bread was smelled. A second official approached, a man with a tidy beard and a small bundle of papers held close to his chest. His clothing was finer than the other clerks. His shoes looked less tired. His eyes looked kind, which was suspicious. Kind eyes could still charge fees. He glanced at the cargo list and nodded. Traders on the route. Eric kept his tone respectful. Traders seeking market access. The official introduced himself with calm precision. Michael Reed, Harbour Customs Clerk. Leif made a small note of the name, because names were anchors. Anchors were useful. Michael Reed looked at the stamped strip, then at the receipts, then back at Eric. You keep record. Eric kept his voice even. Records reduce confusion. Michael Reed gave the faintest hint of approval. They do. They also reduce creative fees. Mara heard that and liked him immediately, which was dangerous. Liking people made you relax. Relaxing people lost coins. Michael Reed gestured toward the coin checker. Dora Vale. She does not dislike traders, she dislikes dishonest metal. Dora Vale continued tapping coins and listening. She picked up the thin coin again and slid it toward Eric. This one will not be accepted for fees or market exchange. You may keep it as a lesson, or exchange it at the money table later for a reduced value. Leif quietly admired the phrasing, reduced value, the most polite way to remove hope. Eric nodded once. Understood. Michael Reed leaned closer, lowering his voice slightly. If you plan to trade in the city, you will want a market token. You will want lodging registration. You will want a cargo entry slip to avoid repeated questions at inner gates. Mara felt her mind automatically arranging these into a new list, which was exactly how the city won. Eric kept his tone calm. Where? Michael Reed pointed with a careful hand. Registration hall near the inner quay. Market token office beside it. Lodging clerks at the inns, but the better inns will require proof of registration first. Do it once, then carry your slips. Leaf wrote quickly now. Do it once. Carry slips. City worships slips. Bran remained at the boat edge, watching the platform and the waiting line behind them. The line moved like a slow river of people, and slow rivers still had current. Someone behind them looked impatient. Impatient people made mistakes. Mistakes invited attention. Eric gathered the papers back into the pouch, kept the wrong receipt tucked safe. The thin coin was returned to his hand. He slipped it into a separate pocket, where it could not contaminate the rest of the coin pouch with shame. Dora Vale finished checking the remaining coins and pushed them back. Acceptable. Michael Reed made a mark on his papers and handed Eric a small entry slip with a stamped seal. Harbour entry recorded. Proceed to registration. Eric took it and held it as if it weighed more than paper. Here, it did. They returned to the boat and pushed off from the checkpoint platform, moving deeper into the harbour. The water inside the walls was calmer, sheltered. The air smelled of stone, tar, spice, and smoke. The sound of the city rose around them, not loud, but constant. A layered murmur that made you feel like you were walking into a living system. Leif finally let himself speak more freely, still quiet. That was not as bad as it could have been. Mara kept her gaze ahead. That is how it begins. Bran guided them toward the inner quay where many boats tied up under the watch of more officials. The docks here were sturdier, the posts were thicker, the ropes were better. Everything looked designed to last and to charge you for lasting. They found a space assigned by a dock attendant who held a board and wore a mild smile that said he had practiced this smile for years. The attendant handed them a wooden marker with a clean notch pattern and pointed to their dock slot. The gesture was efficient, almost kind. Kindness was included in the fee, probably. Eric tied the boat and checked the knot twice. It held. The dock post held too. The city had standards. Standards were expensive, but at least they were real. They moved to the registration hall with the paper pouch and as little cargo as they could manage. Leaving cargo unattended felt wrong, but bringing it all felt worse, so they made a compromise. The heaviest goods stayed covered in the boat. Smaller, valuable items were carried in a simple chest between Bran and Mara. Leif carried the books and papers. Eric carried the tablet and the receipts, like a priest carrying relics. The registration hall was a stone building with a wide doorway and a line that moved at the speed of bureaucracy. Inside, clerks sat at tables under shaded light. People stood in quiet clusters holding slips. The room sounded like paper being handled and voices being kept polite on purpose. A clerk at the front gestured them forward after a wait that felt long enough to create a new religion. The clerk asked for harbour entry slip. Eric provided it. The clerk asked for names and origin again. Eric repeated them without changing his tone. The clerk asked for lodging intent. Eric said they would stay at an inn near the quay. The clerk wrote slowly, as if carving names into time. Then the clerk slid a registration slip across the table and held out a hand. Fee. Eric paid. The clerk stamped the slip and handed it back. The stamp sound was dull and final, a sound that turned movement into permission. Next, the market token office. A smaller room beside the hall with a narrower doorway and a clerk who looked younger and more enthusiastic about rules. The clerk explained what the token allowed, where it could be used, how long it lasted, and what would happen if you tried to be clever. The explanation was long enough to qualify as entertainment. Leif wrote the key parts and ignored the rest. Eric paid for the token. The clerk handed over a small carved piece of wood with a mark notched in a pattern that felt unreasonably proud of itself. Mara turned the token in her hand. We keep collecting kindle with attitudes. Bran gave a small nod. Better kindling than trouble. With registration and market token acquired, they returned to the boat and then sought an inn. The inn near the inner quay was larger than river inns. Stone walls, wooden beams, a covered entryway. Inside, benches and tables and a hearth that smelled of actual cooking rather than survival. The keeper wore clean clothing and looked like someone who had learned to smile while charging. The keeper asked for registration slip. Eric provided it. The keeper asked for market token. Mara held it up. The keeper nodded and offered a room. A room, not a floor corner. not a shared bench, a room with a door and a latch and the promise of privacy. The price was high, it hurt a little, it still felt worth it. Leif wrote a line while walking upstairs. Privacy is expensive. I miss my cheaper suffering. The room was small but clean, straw bedding, a small table, a narrow window that looked out over part of the harbour, where masts and sails made a forest of lines. Outside, the city noise was constant but softened by distance. Inside, it felt like a safe pocket of calm. They set down the chest, checked it, and then checked it again. Bran finally relaxed his shoulders. Mara sat and unwrapped bread. Eric placed the paper pouch and wax tablet on the table carefully, like setting down a fragile tool. Leif opened his book and began to copy key slips into a cleaner page, because Leif believed in redundancy the way some people believed in fate. They ate a meal brought by the inn staff, bread that was better than any river bread, stew that tasted like actual herbs and actual meat. A small dish of olives that made Mara pause, then decide to accept the strange salty bite as a personal challenge. Bran tasted one olive and stared at it as if it had opinions. The sea has corrupted vegetables. Mara ate another and kept her face calm. The sea has improved vegetables. Do not let them hear you complain. Eric ate slowly and listened to the sounds outside the window. A bell in the distance, voices in the street below, the soft clatter of a cart, a shout that was not angry, just part of the city rhythm. Miklagard was busy, but it was controlled busy, like a machine that loved its own sound. After food, they went to the market area near the quay to confirm routes and rules. They did not trade heavily yet. First day in a city like this, you watched, you learned. You let the city show its teeth gently before you put your hand near them. The market near the harbour was wide and crowded. Goods from many lands, spice scents, fine cloth, glass and metalwork, food stalls, sailcloth, rope, small icons and charms for those who like to pay for comfort. Officials moved through the lanes in quiet patrol pairs, not threatening, simply present. Presence was enough. Here you did not need a tree man to invent a toll. The city itself was the toll, and it did not pretend otherwise. They located a booth where coin exchange happened under official watch. Dora Vale was not there, but another coin checker sat with a tray and a small hammer tool. Eric did not exchange the thin coin, not yet. He kept it as a reminder that coins could betray you quietly. Leif noticed a board on the wall that listed market rules, written in neat letters. He wanted to copy it, then remembered the TTS safe world and his own sanity. He summarized instead in his book, "Do not fight. Do not shout. Do not sell without token. Do not block lanes. Do not lie about measures unless you are prepared to be corrected publicly." Mara watched a merchant attempt a measure trick and then get corrected by a clerk who did it with the calm cruelty of perfect arithmetic. The merchant apologized with a smile that looked painful. The clerk accepted with a nod that looked practiced. The exchange ended without drama. Miklagard had refined the art of gentle humiliation. By late afternoon they returned to the inn, tired but steady. The day had been full of waiting, stamps, and mild pressure. The city had squeezed them gently and checked what came out. Coins, papers, patience. So far the squeeze had not broken them. In the room, Eric took out the wax tablet and rewrote the cargo list again, adding new entries. Harbour entry slip, registration slip, market token, lodging record, thin coin not accepted. He wrote it all neatly, because neatness was the only form of control that did not require permission. Leif copied the list into his book as well, because 2 lists were better than 1 and also twice as comforting. Mara cleaned the spoon and placed it on the small table not hidden. A quiet declaration. We have one thing in this city that is ours and will remain ours. Bran checked the boat line from the window and nodded. The boat is safe enough. Safe enough is the best kind of safe. As night settled, the city outside did not go quiet. It softened. The harbour lights flickered. Voices lowered. The machine of Miklagard kept moving, just slower, like a river at dusk. Eric sat by the window for a moment and looked at the walls. He did not stare. He kept his gaze brief and practical. Walls meant security. Walls also meant gates, and gates meant more slips, more checks, more ways for the city to ask what you carried and what you intended to do with it. Tomorrow they would trade for real. Tomorrow they would meet more clerks. Tomorrow the city would test their mettle again, in coin and in patience. For now they had a room, a door, and a latch. They had bread that tasted like progress. They had paper that proved they belonged, at least temporarily. They had calm voices and tired hands, and a boat that had carried them across rivers, portages, rapids, and sea. Miklagard had welcomed them in the only way it knew, by checking every detail and charging for the check. Chapter 10. The Coin Checkers and the Smallest Receipt. Morning in Miklagard arrived without asking anyone if they were ready. The harbour woke in layers. Rope creaks first, then footsteps, then voices, then the steady pulse of trade that never fully slept. From the small inn window the masts looked like a forest of lines drawn by someone who loved geometry and disliked rest. Eric rose early and checked the paper pouch before he checked the sky. Harbour entry slip, registration slip, market token, receipts, route note, wrong receipt, and the thin coin tucked separately like a bad memory. Everything was still there. Proof remained intact. Proof was the closest thing to peace the city offered. Leif copied the day plan into his book, not because they did not know it, but because writing it down made it feel like a choice rather than a current. Sell enough to make the journey worth it. Buy enough to make the return possible. Avoid becoming interesting. Mara cleaned the spoon, then placed it back in its pouch with a gentleness that suggested the spoon had earned respect. The spoon was absurd, and yet it had survived rivers and rapids. It was not wise to mock anything that survived. Bran ate bread slowly, looking out at the harbour. The boat is waiting. It does not like city smells. Mara took a bite of bread and kept her expression calm. The boat can complain later. We will be civilized first. They went to the market near the quay with the light goods and the heavy caution. The market token hung from a cord inside Eric's tunic where it could be produced quickly and not taken easily. They did not bring everything at once. They brought enough to trade without making a spectacle. The market in Miklagard was not a single place. It was a system. Lanes ran into lanes. Stalls shifted with the day. People moved with purpose and with rules. Here a seller did not simply offer goods. A seller fit into a pattern of measurements, permissions, and glances from officials who could appear without warning. The first trade was wax. Clean blocks, sealed well, pale and smooth. A candle maker examined the surface with the calm scrutiny of someone judging whether a block would behave under flame. The candle maker offered a price that sounded fair and also sounded like it had been rehearsed. Eric responded with a counter that was only slightly better, not bold, not insulting, just enough to make it feel like a trade rather than surrender. The candle maker nodded once and agreed. Coins changed hands. The coins rang softly and felt heavier here, not by weight but by meaning. Leif recorded the exchange in his book with neat marks and short words. Wax sold, price acceptable. No theatrical gestures. Mara watched the coin handoff and noted the hands. Clean hands. No tremor, no hurry. That was good. Hurry made mistakes, and mistakes drew clerks. Next was honey. A buyer from a sweet shop inspected the jars through cloth wrappings. The buyer did not open them. Opening them would have been too honest. Instead, the buyer pressed a finger against the cloth near the lid and sniffed the air as if smell could travel through fibre. The buyer smiled in satisfaction and offered coins. Eric accepted, then immediately tucked the coins away and adjusted his calm face. Satisfaction could be read as weakness. Bran carried the empty jar space back toward the inn in his mind. Empty space was valuable. Empty space meant room for return goods. Return goods were the reason they were here, also the reason they would leave. They sold a small bundle of furs next, not the best, not the worst. A cloth merchant inspected the fur edges and then inspected Eric as if the fur might be contagious. The cloth merchant offered a price that was decent and a little cold. Eric accepted because decent and cold was still profit. The morning passed in clean trades. Not perfect trades, but trades without arguments. That was success in Miklagard. Success was not only money, success was leaving each stall without new enemies. By midday they had sold enough to feel the city loosen its grip slightly. Their coin pouch was heavier, their cargo was lighter, their paper pouch remained thick, because Miklagard always added slips to your life. They went to an exchange table to convert some coins into a form more widely accepted in the city markets. The exchange table sat under a shaded awning with a clerk and a coin checker. The coin checker here was not Dora Vale, but the posture was similar: calm hands, sharp eyes, a small hammer tool, a tray that looked like it had seen many hopes placed on it. Leif quietly pointed out that Dora Vale might be nearby, working other tables. Mara glanced across the lane and saw her, seated at a different booth, tapping coins with the same focused patience, as if listening to metal was a kind of music. Eric chose the closer exchange table to avoid appearing like they were seeking a specific person. Seeking a specific person in Miklagard was a way to invite questions. Questions were rarely free. The exchange clerk asked for the market token. Mara held it up. The clerk nodded and gestured for coins. Eric placed a small stack on the table. Not too much. Enough. The coin checker picked up the first coin, turned it in the light, tapped it once, then set it down. The second coin followed. Tap, listen, set. Everything moved smoothly until the coin checker picked up a coin that looked normal to everyone else. The coin checker tapped it, paused, tapped again, then held it closer to the eye. The coin checker did not look angry. The coin checker looked interested, which was worse. Interest meant time. The coin checker placed the coin slightly apart from the others. Mara felt the air tighten. Leif stopped writing. Bran shifted his weight closer, the way a person shifts closer to a rope knot that might fail. Eric kept his face calm. That coin came from a wax trade this morning. The coin checker tapped it again, listening. The sound was duller, like a bell wrapped in cloth. The coin checker spoke quietly. This one is soft. Leif leaned in slightly, voice mild. Soft like worn, or soft like false. The coin checker considered for a breath, then answered. Soft like mixed metal, not pure enough, not acceptable at full value. The exchange clerk looked over, eyes narrowing. The exchange clerk pulled a small scale closer as if measuring could restore dignity. Mara watched the surrounding lanes. People were moving. Some glanced over. Glances were the start of a crowd. A crowd was the start of attention. Attention was the start of stories. Eric kept the tone calm. It came to us in trade. We did not make it. The exchange clerk slid the coin toward Eric. You keep it, or we exchange it as reduced. Leif made a tiny mark in his book, the kind made under pressure. Reduced again. The city loves the word reduced. Eric nodded once. Understood. Reduced is acceptable. The exchange clerk did not move yet. Instead, the exchange clerk lifted a hand slightly, a gesture toward an official walking the lane, a man with finer clothing and a paper bundle. The official slowed, turning toward the booth with the calm of someone who had time. Mara kept her face neutral. This was the whisper volume drama. No shouting, no threats, just the slow tightening of a system around one imperfect coin. The official arrived and looked at the coin, then at Eric. The official asked for the market token again, though it had already been shown. The question was not about the token, it was about compliance. Mara held it up again, steady. The official nodded, then looked at the coin checker. Confirm. The coin checker tapped the coin a final time and nodded. Mixed metal. The official looked at Eric with polite certainty. This is not an accusation. This is a correction. The city does not accept mixed metal at full value. Leif wanted to speak and did not. Speaking too much here was like stepping into a net and then complaining about the design. Eric kept the calm face and answered with the correct humble tone. We accept the correction. We request exchange at reduced value. The official nodded, satisfied. Good. Then we proceed. The exchange clerk wrote a small slip and pressed a stamp on it. The stamp sound was dull and final. The clerk handed the slip over along with a smaller coin return than expected. The mixed coin was taken away and placed in a separate tray like a contagious object. Mara watched the slip and immediately wanted to keep it forever. Proof of the correction, proof of the reduction, proof that it was handled properly, proof that they did not cause trouble. Leif wrote one line, "One coin tried to become a story we refused to perform." Bran exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that returns after a held moment. That was almost nothing, and still it felt like a storm. Eric tucked the slip away and adjusted the coin pouch. That is the city. It squeezes gently until you understand where you fit. They moved away from the booth and found a quieter lane to stand and regroup. Miklagard continued around them as if nothing happened. That was the most unsettling part. In smaller places, small problems became entertainment. Here, small problems became paperwork and then vanished. Mara glanced toward Dora Vale again, still working her booth. Dora Vale did not look up once. Dora Vale lived in a world of metal tones, and the rest of the market was background noise. In a strange way, it was comforting. Everyone had a role. Even discomfort had a role. They spent the afternoon buying return goods. Note the flashy items that would attract too much attention back home, but the goods that travelled well and sold well. Fine cloth in small bolts, folded tight, glass beads in wrapped bundles, small metalwork pieces, spices in tiny sacks that smelled like warmth and foreign kitchens. A few tools of better quality than they could find up north. Eric chose carefully, balancing weight and value. Bran judged wood-handled tools with approval. Leif recorded every purchase and every fee. Mara watched the sellers' faces and kept the pace steady. No rush, no greed, no wide eyes. They returned to the inn before dusk with purchases packed and tied. Bran checked every knot twice. Mara checked the spoon pouch once, then again, because the spoon had become a superstition, and superstitions were cheap compared to mistakes. In the room, Eric laid out the papers and slips on the table in neat rows. Harbour entry slip, registration slip, market token, lodging record, corrected receipts, exchange slip, reduction slip. The wrong receipt from upriver still sat among them like a quiet joke, a reminder that the route had tried to cheat them long before the city ever met them. Leif added the new slips to the book record. Then Leif stared at the page for a moment as if seeing the shape of their entire journey in ink. Mara broke the silence with a soft observation. Miklagard is impressive. Bran looked up from a rope knot. The walls are impressive, the paperwork is not. Mara nodded. The walls scare you into behaving. The paperwork makes sure you keep behaving. Eric rewrote the cargo list again, but now the list looked different. It was a reverse list. What remained from the north was mostly replaced by what they had purchased here. The list had become a homeward plan. Leif watched the stylus move. The list has changed careers. It is now a return list. Eric kept the line straight. The list is adaptable. The list wants to survive. That evening they took a short walk through the city, not to shop, just to see and to let the mind settle. Miklagard had streets that felt older than many northern stories, stone underfoot, buildings that rose higher and tighter than river towns, people moving with purpose and habit, as if the city itself had taught them how to walk. They passed a fountain where water flowed steadily, controlled, not like a river, not like a sea. Controlled water felt like a luxury. They passed a small shrine where a lamp burned behind a screen. They passed a bread stall where the smell could have convinced anyone to stay forever, if staying forever did not require constant registration. Leif noted quietly that the city was beautiful in a practical way. Built for trade, built for defense, built for rules. Beauty with boundaries. Mara kept her voice low. I like it here, which means we should leave. Bran looked at the stone walls and then at the sky. The boat also wants to leave. Eric looked at a gate in the distance with a clerk stationed beside it. Leaving will also involve fees. Leif nodded. Leaving always involves fees. It is the only tradition that crosses every border. They returned to the inn and prepared for departure the next day. Bran checked the boat line again from the window. Eric counted coins and separated them into small bundles for expected payments, harbour fees, food and emergencies. Leif copied the most important slips into a smaller bundle to carry on the body, because paper was only useful if it stayed with you. Mara arranged the goods into tight packs, then tied them with care. Before sleep, Eric took out the wax tablet and wrote one last clean version of the cargo list for Miklagard, neat and final. He added a small note at the bottom. 1 mixed coin corrected. 1 lesson purchased at reduced value. It was a calm way to admit that even here, even after surviving rapids and watchers, a coin could still try to become a problem. They slept in the small room behind a latched door. Outside, the city softened again into its night rhythm. Not silent, just quieter. A bell in the distance, a cartwheel, a distant voice. The harbour lights flickering like steady eyes. Morning came. They paid the innkeeper, received a lodging slip that proved they had paid, and tucked it away because the city loved receipts the way rivers loved current. At the dock, an official checked their marker and their harbour entry slip again. Another stamp, another small fee, another calm nod. The boat was allowed to leave its slot. Allowed. Even their movement into the water required permission. Bran pushed off with controlled effort. The boat slid free of the dock, and the feeling was immediate, like removing a tight collar. The water opened ahead. The walls still loomed, but the boat angled away from them, and that felt like relief you could measure. They joined the outward line of boats moving toward the harbour exit checkpoint, waiting again, slow and steady. The city loved lines. Lines made people behave. At the checkpoint, Michael Reed appeared again, or someone who looked enough like him that it might as well have been him. Clean clothing, neat papers, calm eyes. The harbour entry slip and registration slip were checked. The market token was noted. A final fee was paid. A final stamp was pressed. The stamp sound was the last heartbeat of Miklagard on their papers. Dora Vale was visible at a nearby booth, tapping coins in the same calm rhythm. She did not look up. She did not need to. Coins always came to her. The boat slid past the checkpoint into the broader harbour water, then out toward the open sea. The walls began to shrink behind them, still massive, still present, but no longer directly above their heads. Mara watched the walls recede without staring. There it goes, a great city, reduced to a line again. Leif opened the book and wrote one short line. Departure complete. Paper survived. Bran adjusted the sail as the wind caught it. The boat approves. Eric touched the pouch with the wax tablet and the slips. The cargo list had survived. The goods had changed hands. The coins had been checked. One coin had tried to become a drama and failed. They moved along the coast, heading back toward the river mouth and the long northward pool. The sea rolled under them with calmer manners than before, as if granting them a small favour for leaving politely. Behind them, Miklagard stayed where it was, exactly as it liked to be. A place of walls and rules and calm pressure. A place that did not shout, because it did not need to. Its power lived in stamps and lines, and the quiet certainty that everything could be measured. Ahead, the route waited in reverse. Coastal stops with wind fees, river mouths with sandbars, portages that would feel different with lighter boat weight and heavier trade goods, markets where their new cloth and beads would spark envy, toll posts that would try again, because toll posts always tried again. But for now, the boat moved steady, the sail held, the crew kept their faces calm. The road home had begun, and the first stretch of it felt almost gentle. Almost.